please rise?
Really?
But, you know, it's,
And welcome to the Town of Fairfield, Connecticut's Board of Finance Public Executive Session for the 2018 fiscal year budget. There is no public comment tonight. This is strictly a voting night for our board. If there are department heads in attendance and board members will have questions, we will call upon them for those questions. I would like to ask Mr. Chris DeWitt, whose birthday it is tonight, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to ask everybody to remain standing for a minute. We had some very sad news earlier today. Our first selectman's father, Fern Tetreault, passed away. He's a longtime educator and football coach in the town. He's pretty much a legendary figure, and he was in his mid-90s, and he passed away today. Mr. Tetreault I got to know when he was older. I used to see him at church every Sunday. And as I used to tease Mike, being the good Republican that he is, I'm pretty sure he voted for me a couple of times, even when I ran against Mike. But Mr. Tetreault's a great guy. We're all going to miss him. Our thoughts, our condolences, our sympathies go out to the entire Tetreault family. And I'd like to hold a moment of silence in his honor, and our thoughts and prayers are with the First Selectman tonight. Thank you very much. And as noted, Mr. Tetreault will be with his family tonight, as he rightfully should be, and they're all in our thoughts. As I mentioned, tonight is our voting night on the Board of Finance for the 2018 budget. The state of play for this evening, I want to hear first from Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Gardner and have them just walk us through the adjustments that the Board of Selectmen made so that we're all on the same page. Then we will vote on the revenue items for this budget, not the tax rate itself, but everything but the tax rate and any adjustments thereto. We'll vote on the Board of Education next, as we know a lot in attendance come for that item. Then we'll go and do a flip through all the town side departments, and we'll go department by department, ask about any adjustments, any amendments to those budgets, and vote on them. Then we'll vote on the budget as a whole, and finally we'll vote on the WPCA. Before we get started on that, though, as we all know, it's been a strange budget year, impacted greatly by what's going on at the state level, including just this past week. After the Board of Selectmen made their votes the other day, there was late-breaking news that the Speaker of the House, who had earlier said that he was totally against the pensions from the state level being pushed down at the state, seemed to signal a softening of that stance and said, well, maybe we could phase in some of those pensions coming down, being pushed down to the towns. So that was a bit of a new information that went against a lot of what we had been told and a lot about how the Board of Selectmen voted the other day, at least from my understanding. This may change and impact some of the votes tonight, and as we said, we're voting with less than perfect information and less than a final state budget. We're not 100% positive in how things will go at that level and how that might impact us later this year. Now, in all sincerity, if that happens, we only have one of three options after we make these votes and after we set the mill rate. And those options could include, number one, the administration having to look for expense reductions throughout this budget to offset any of the revenue shortfalls or expense pushdowns from the state. Number two, it could result in us having to take money from our surplus to help offset some of those expenses that can't be trimmed at the town level. Or number three, it could result in a supplemental tax bill, something that I don't know when that's ever happened for this town, but it's certainly been long before any of us were involved. But that is something that could result, depending on what happens at the state level. 1, 2, 3, all of those options might be on the table later this year. Now, this year, we understand, is not a one-year crisis. This goes on for multiple years. And this was a shot directly at our bow as a town. And make no mistake about it, there's some damage that's been inflicted, and it's likely that there's more to come in the future years. We're trying to buy some time for the town departments, for the leadership of the other boards and commissions, and for elected officials as a whole to put in place a proactive plan to address this systematically and strategically, as opposed to just going for the big meat on the bone right now. So this board is calling on all department heads, all commissions, all elected boards, and the leadership of the town to take proactive steps in the next 12 months to be prepared for the next budget cycle, so we're not finding ourselves in the same position. This economic model, as currently contrived, is broken, and it's causing great pain and distress to the services that we provide, as well as our taxpayers as a whole. We need to leave no stone unturned in looking for how we're more efficient and how we gain more revenue for the town, not on the burden of our taxpayers. Tax increases and affordability are more and more becoming an issue, not just for the less advantaged in the town, but for everyone, including our seniors, including our working single parents, including town employees who live in town, such as the over 300 teachers that call Fairfield home. We need to be proactive, not reactive, no more than this than we've always done. Make no mistake that the threat is real and it will be severe. Tonight, we're calling upon the Board of Selectmen to expedite and impanel the Strategic Planning Committee as soon as possible, and for that committee to start its work as quickly as possible. We call on all department heads to review all their policies, procedures, staffing, and services for areas where they can provide more efficiency, do more with less, and look at services that they no longer need to provide the town if that proves to be the case. We call on all board and commissions to review revenue increases, service level requirements, and their policies and procedures, particularly as it relates to fees for services that they can provide and may not be at market rates. We call on the Economic Development Department to be more aggressive, to come to this board and ask for more funds, to go after additional corporate development, to make us competitive, not just with local towns and municipalities, but also across the United States, and we support them in our efforts. And one of our members, Mrs. Mary LeClaire, I want to call it out publicly, had an excellent idea that we would like to move forward with, and that is next September, when we hold our Capital Planning Summit. Instead of it just being a capital planning summit or workshop, we actually want to hear a report back from the First Selectman, from the Board of Education, and from the relevant town departments on what steps they're looking at, what they're doing to review their operations, and how we can address these issues on a go-forward basis. That will be September. We look forward to that meeting, and we thank Mrs. LeClaire for coming up with the idea. Particularly to the Board of Education, you play a critical role in this town. You've done wonderful things. Our administrators and our teachers have lots to be proud of with how they've provided for our children. But we need to be careful there as well. We need the administration, we need the Board of Education to go through exactly the same type of review we're asking the town to go through. And most importantly, and this is coming from someone whose mother was a teacher for 35 years, I would like to ask that you use your teachers to review what they're responsible for day to day. They're the best equipped to come back with where they can be more efficient, what can help them in the classroom, what silliness we can fight against, what mandates we can push back on, so they can continue to provide the quality education for the students, but at the most efficient cost possible. This is a threat that's not going away. We need to be prepared for it. We need to be prepared for it now and moving forward. And we need to use everything at our disposal to do so. We need to revisit how everything is done. These are challenging times. It's not pleasant, but we have to deal with these issues. We can't do what the state has done, which is engage in ostrich management, bury our head in the sands, and not tackle the significant financial issues that are coming our way. I'm a firm believer, and I think our board are firm believers in what's called the 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance. We are trying to buy time to allow our experts in all our fields of services to make appropriate adjustments within their departments so that we don't deal with a degradation of services that anybody in this town does not want to see. That goes from police, fire, library, Board of Education, in all of our areas of expertise. And we need everybody's help between now and the next budget season to be prepared with what may be coming our way from the state. So it's with that backdrop that we're ready to vote tonight. Before we vote, I want to ask if any of my colleagues have anything they want to add to that? Anything they want to say?
Well said, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Before we start the formal voting process, I want to first of all acknowledge all the hard work and effort that goes into a budget. I want to thank Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Gardner, the department heads across the town for all their efforts. I want to thank the Board of Education, Dr. Jones, Mrs. Manzel, all your department heads and your direct reports for all the hard work and effort. A budget just doesn't start during March. All the heavy lifting comes in the fall, and you guys all deserve a lot of credit for all the moving pieces that you all need to be put together. I also want to thank everybody for your hard work and diligence in responding to all our questions and putting it all together. We also want to send our appreciation to the Board of Selectmen. They were fine colleagues in this, asked good questions, brought good humor, and we enjoyed their company here at our board each and every night. I also want to extend my thanks to my colleagues for your good cheer, for the good refreshments, for the good questions and the quality of the debate. I'm sure that'll continue tonight. Let's make sure we keep our votes respectful and on target. At this point, is there anything else? Seeing none, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk us through, if you would, what the Board of Selectmen did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this on?
It appears to be.
Good, thank you. I'm going to put these in 3 categories. The first category is a major accounting adjustment, actually, where initially the initial budget had use of reserves, a transfer from reserves shown as a revenue, and also had the use of the premium, bond premium shown as a revenue. Those were reclassified as contra expenses, which reduced both our premium, both our revenues and our expenses. The amount for the reserve transfer was $919,000. The amount of the debt service, bond premium utilization was $1,122,313,000. Then the second set is items that were identified as we were going through the process and finalizing all the paperwork. We found that there was a little bit of a misclass between the retirement benefits between the town and the police and fire. So it was not a misclass, excuse me. There was an updated pension report from the actuary. Thank you, Linda. So there was a reduction of $9,235 on the town side, and reduction of $40,000 on the police and fire side. We received our February information regarding the health insurance experience and utilization, which had a positive impact of $270,247. The tax collector was hired during this process. His salary is less than what was budgeted. That gave us a saving of $21,878, and plus the Social Security impact of that number, $1,673. And there was an IT communications adjustment, which I'm not sure what it was for, $5,410? Oh, that was a transfer, a deduction from the IT budget and a transfer into the police department budget. All right, then, at the Board of Selectmen meeting, the following entries were made. As you alluded to, Mr. Chair, the board was operating under the impression that the transfer from the state to pay, for the town to pay portion of the teacher's retirement contribution was not going to be an issue. So there was a reduction in expenses of $9,194,608, which led to an addition to the Board of Ed budget in allocating that money, $2 million to the Board of Ed, $32,400 to the part-time payroll in the library, $29,000 pay differential in the library, $26,815 part-time payroll in the library, another $16,000 different salary line item pay differential in the library. And then they took some additional cuts. They put 2 positions on what are they calling, vacancy hold, which means the positions stay in the salaries, not in the salary schedule, but in the employee schedule, but they're not funded. And that was a technician at the main library, $98,633, and a current vacant position in Parks and Rec, $67,816. And then the associated Social Security adjustments relating to those positions is a combination of all those payroll entries was a reduction of $2,924 in Social Security, plus for the library, and $5,188 Social Security for Parks and Rec. And then, as a result, and then there was also a $38,000 reduction in legal services. And then as a result of all of those entries, that reduced the budget and therefore reduced the required contribution of surplus, and an entry of $1,020,000, an adjustment of $1,020,000 was made to reduce the contribution to surplus allocation. And I think I got them all.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for walking down. Any quick questions, comments from anyone?
Oh, excuse me, one other, I apologize, and then it just reminded me. The Parks and Rec Commission had a vote, and they increased their fees, which had a $100,000 positive impact to revenue for Penfield rental.
That's at the top. Yep. Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Any comments or questions? Mostly questions on this. All right, so now we know pretty much what the Board of Selectmen did. All right, so seeing none, I'm going to turn to the revenue section of the budget. Do we have any adjustments to revenue? Now, we're not talking about current year tax levy. That obviously falls out after we set the expense. So all other revenue line items. Mr. Becker, I know you had one.
Yeah, we discussed the revolving fund for Parks and Rec, and according to the report that we have ended 9/30/16, they had $276,902.41. And reviewing the policy, when it's over $200,000, we make a transfer into the general fund. So take a motion at this point. I'd like to make a motion that we transfer $76,902.41 from the revolving Parks and Rec fund into the general fund.
I think that's been budgeted. I think the policy requires the balance as of September 30th to be transferred.
So it's in the budget
We went
already?
through it and we didn't,
I didn't think it was in the budget
Yeah.
when we talked about it.
we talked about that it wasn't.
that it wasn't.
I think it is.
They took that already. They swept that account. That 76 was part of the additional 200 $150, I believe, that Mr. Ketchum had required earlier this year.
So that's already been swept this year, so that balance is no longer available? Is that what we're hearing?
No, I will tell you, you budgeted $80,000, you estimated $80,000 will come to us on October 1st, 2017.
Speak to us, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, if you open your budget book to page 49, you'll see account 42403.
Because we specifically asked for that.
Yeah,
Actually, I wouldn't
recreation
make the motion if
programs,
this came up.
and at the time, Anthony estimated it would be $80,000, not the 76 residual that
Okay,
you're seeing
so
now.
you're 100% positive that's what this 80 represents?
Yes, I am.
The third line down, is that what we're talking about?
The rec
It's,
programs line?
42403 under Recreation Parks and Rec.
Okay.
That's the revolving fund excess anticipated.
Thank you, because we asked that question, we were not told that during the budget
Yeah,
process.
rescind that motion then if.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Any other comments, questions on revenue? We're on the revenue side of the budget right now. Mr. Walsh?
I'm going to make a motion to, I don't know if this is on. Okay. I'm going to make a motion to increase the conveyance tax line. I think it's 01001-42312
By how much, Mr. Walsh?
by $100,000. It's budgeted right now pursuant to the Board of Selectmen budget that was handed to us, a recommendation of $1,775. I'm making a motion to increase it to $1,875.
I'll second that motion for purposes of discussion.
I didn't
Are we
ca-
on the revenue?
What, I didn't catch that. Do you have your differential?
Oh, thank you.
It's $100,000.
$1,000 increase?
$1,000 increase on conveyance.
Good, thank you.
And do we have any questions, comments, concerns on this? Mr. Walsh, do you have additional information you'd like to share with us?
Just
or-
based on where they are and where the spring season's going, it's my estimate, based on that they can take $100,000 additional for next year.
Do we have any questions, concerns on this? Mr. Mayor, do you have any additional information or thoughts on this?
No, sir.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on Mr. Walsh's amendment to add $100,000 to the conveyance tax line. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Are you opposed, Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins is opposed. It carries 8-1, so that line item has been adjusted by $100,000. Any other adjustments to revenue line items within the budget?
I significantly thought about this prior year tax levy, which I believe is the tax sale, is that correct? Where it's going up by over 100%. I mean, I think the number is extremely high, although I have nothing to justify reducing it, except it's an extremely risky number. And if we don't get that, I mean, some of these taxes are being paid even as of today, some of the ones we want to sell. It could significantly affect our budget.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments on Mr. Walsh's concern?
Yeah, it's a very valid concern. At the time, we're adding the $9 million to the budget, and we're looking, so, okay, how much is what's our past tax? If you add up the past tax, when I looked at that a couple months ago, the past due tax, including liens and interest, it came to close to $700,000, excuse me, $7 million. And so then you figure, okay, we're going to get some of that this year, and so I just made an estimate that this might be a reasonable number.
There's no
Trying
better
not-
information
Trying
or-
not to be overly aggressive, trying not to be conservative, just doing the best.
There's no better available information, so there's nothing
No.
that's come to light from our discussion.
No.
But we're just highlighting the fact that this is a growth item within the budget.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's
Where is this in the budget book?
So then it's on prior year tax levies on page 54. It goes up by it's $4.4 million versus $2.2 million last year. But we have $7 million outstanding, correct?
getting close to.
And you're doing
Some
a
of-
lien sale here,
It's a tax sale.
tax sale, yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Matola?
When was the last tax sale we did, Bob? Was it 5 years ago?
2012, I think.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, this is kind of one of our reserve areas that we've always had, right? So if we sell this year, we're not going to have this next year if we get hit by the state with something major next year, correct? So we're blowing through a reserve area. that the town always has.
That is correct.
Okay, just want to make note of that because it's going to be a continuing theme as we go through this budget.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Seeing none, anybody have anything else on revenue line items for this budget? If not, I'm going to call for a vote on revenue, not including the current year tax levy, as it's presented in the budget book with the amendment of the $100,000 that we did on conveyance, okay? All in favor for revenue as it's been stated? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, revenue passes. I'm going to now turn and go to the Board of Education budget, which could, page 307, it starts in our budget book.
Sorry, what page, Mr.?
307, 308. Okay, now this was, can I have the total of the Board of Education budget as approved by the Board of Selectmen? Please.
168, 757, I'm sorry, 168, 724, 490.
724,
490.
490. No pennies in there that we're missing or anything.
No, but I buy full.
All right, $168,724,490 is the approved budget by the Board of Selectmen for the Board of Education for fiscal year 2018. I'm going to put that number before us. Do I have a second? Mr. Brown is my second. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts on this budget? Anyone? Mr. Walsh?
I'm not going to make a motion on it. I will tell you it is a risky move by the Board of Selectmen, especially with the information that came yesterday, because we have the House Speaker, which I understand
I don't know that it's using, that it's working. Might just be me. Okay.
We have the First Selectman, I know, found some favorable information. That was reported in a number of different places. One of them was the Council of Small Towns that I got from another First Selectman that I know, where the House Speaker was saying that he did not believe they had the votes for the teacher pension allotment that they plan on giving Fairfield of $9 million, that they did not have the votes and it would not pass. And then several days later, something happened. Someone got to him, where in the Connecticut Mirror and the Hartford Current articles yesterday, he is stating that now he thinks that there's going to be a compromise wherein they are going to charge the Connecticut towns for the pension. Not sure exactly the amounts, and they might phase it in over time, but that's information that the Board of Selectmen didn't have before them at the time. So the Board of Selectmen takes the $9 million and spends some of it, $2 million on the Board of Education, which, if the previous information is correct, seemed to be a wise move. But then with this newest information, now it puts all that in question, and it's stuff that the Board of Selectmen didn't even have the ability to debate on. And this seems to be, we don't even know whether this is definite ourselves. And this is the problem with the state and how they're playing games with the municipalities. I will also state that the Council of Small Towns is also saying that the ECS and special education funding, that there's two bills, one before HB 7270 and the Senate bill SB 2 are putting placeholders and also trying to say that the education cost sharing amounts might not be cut, but may be adjusted based on town's wealth. So all of this is up in the air. It's going to put a significant stress on this town if any amount comes down. And as the budget is currently before us, if we got hit with any amounts, it would be a disaster. Because as the as this budget is before us right now, as it came out of the Board of Selectmen, there are no hold areas that the first selectman can put on any part of the budget, such as he had to do last year when he had to tell department heads to hold back. In those areas, he did paving, as we all know. He did trucks. Not one truck has been purchased that was in the budget from last year for DPW. He did some other areas, and he did stuff with the library. All that stuff has been removed at the Board of Selectmen level, and there's no wiggle room. There's no place for the first selectman to put holds on this budget anymore. And once we give the Board of Education their funds, and I don't doubt that they deserve that extra $2 million. I don't doubt it at all. And I was prepared until this information came out, and I'm still probably prepared to vote on it as well. But where's the first selectman or this town going to go if we get hit with $2 to $3 million of costs? Because the Board of Ed, as we all know, once we give them their money and we vote on it, gets that money, it's all theirs. We can't pull it back anymore. So therefore, once again, it would be on the town side, the 1/3 of the budget that's on the town side. That would cause devastation. It would cause major layoffs in the town. Cut back on major services. I mean, we're talking like beaches closed, you name it, everything would have to be on the table. And we, I think, as a board tonight are going to have to deal with that issue and to try to get, I think, some money back into this budget, into certain areas, so that, God forbid that were to happen, you know, I think we need an area to give some wiggle room for this administration if something happens. I just think that the budget before us, and especially with the news before us, is not responsible at this point in time. So we're going to have to do something. And with that, I'm just pointing out, we have the $2 million that's been added by the Board of Selectmen several days ago. And we're about to vote on that. But everybody's got to know what they're voting on. So that we're going to give them that money. But once they have that, that's their full funding. And pursuant to this stuff that came out of Council of Small Towns, the Board of Ed's going to, it looks like they'll get the ECS, the special education funding, because these two bills are before. So I don't know where it's going to go, but we all got to go into this with open eyes.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we vote on the Board of Education budget? Seeing none, I'm going to put the Board of Education budget before us at $168,724,490. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item passes. So the Board of Education budget is approved as of right now at the level recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Walsh, thank you for your comments. Your concerns are valid and are actually very consistent with my own comments during my opening, so thank you for those. Now, I'm going to turn and I'm going to flip through the budget book. And I'm going to go department by department. Here's our budget book. And I'll start, if we don't mind. And feel free to tell me if I goof this up, which has been known to happen. I believe
It's page 79.
we should start with page 79, which is the first selectman's office. So I'm not going to call for a vote on each department, but I will ask if there's any amendment. Then we'll vote on the amendment, and then at the end, we'll vote on all the departments as amended throughout the process. So, Mrs. Gardner and Mr. Mayor, if you could keep a running tab so we know exactly the dollar amount of the final budget we're voting on, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay? All right, so the first selectman department is in front of us. Do I have any comments or amendments to this budget? Anyone? Mr. Walsh?
I'm going to make a motion to reduce the fees and professional service line that is now budgeted at $3,000 to zero.
Any other adjustments?
And I'm going to make a motion to reduce the office supplies numbers from $3,000 to $500 cut, to reduce it to $2,500. That'll be a total savings in that department of $3,500. Part of my reasoning for doing that is while all the other departments in town were asked to pretty much try to go down to zero and did a good job at trying to do that, the First Selectman's department, especially in the salary line, increased, and one individual increased by 22.25%. I don't think that was appropriate. He thought it was. In this type of budget, I don't think you have to be a leader, and you have to, lead by example, and I don't think it looks good optically that his administrative assistant is getting a 22.25% increase in 1 year. So I'm getting that money back, and I'm just not, I don't want to raise that department's total budget, and I'm going to be trying to find that 13. This will start with 3,500, and I have another place where I'm going to be getting the other 10.
Do we have a second to Mr. Walsh's motion? We have Mr. DeWitt on the second on the motion to reduce it by 3,500, 3,000 in professional services, $500 in office supplies. Comments by board members, questions by board members. Mr. Mottola.
Just a comment. So the administrative assistant position that you're referring to, that's the position where there was a job reclassification and a study to determine what that individual was doing? Is that the position you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly the position where it went from a 5, where that position has always been a Secretary B, I think, correct? Secretary B, and now it's been raised to something above that.
Okay, all right. And just for the record, I thought we had documentation that that person is doing certain job duties over and above what she had previously been doing. So I just want to make that clear, but I understand what Mr. Walsh is saying.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Hopkins.
I just want to ask a question of Ms. Gardner. Did you have a comment you wanted to make? Because while Mr. Walsh was speaking, you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I didn't hear the number for office supplies.
Oh, it was $500.
I got it.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, any other questions, comments? Seeing none, the motion is before us to reduce the First Selectman's office budget by $3,500 in total, $3,000 on professional fees, and $500 on office supplies. All in favor of that? Opposed? Abstentions. So it looks like there's 2 opposed, 7 for. So that item carries, so the First Selectman's budget is adjusted downwards by $3,500. Any other adjustments to the First Selectman budget? Any other adjustments? I'm going to move on.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah.
If the state comes after the town of Fairfield for a lot of money this year, and if it's going to continue to look bad for the state, our municipal funding, I would say that my analysis of this budget for next year, I'm just putting everybody on notice, would be, this is one of the areas I think we're going to have to look at in regards to staffing going forward. And I understand these people do constituent services, some of the people, and the town's going to have to make a decision on whether they want a very high tax increase or a little less constituent services.
Thank you very much. Any other? Mr. Mottola.
And I appreciate what Mr. Walsh is saying. I actually looked at other mayor offices and First Selectman offices in neighboring towns, and what's in the First Selectman's office from a position standpoint is comparable to every other town around us. So, but you're right, Mr. Walsh, we may have to look at all departments and do things a little differently next year.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about structural changes, John, and it's when you look at the services and I'm going to mention a couple other departments. I'm just trying to put people on notice to start looking at some things. It's just that it's one of the areas we might have to tighten up on as we go forward.
Quite frankly, they're all areas we're going to have to look at. Nothing can be without being looked at. Mr. DeWitt?
Just one more quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be clear, take us back to when we talked about this budget during hearings. The 3 people in this office, excluding the First Selectman, their raises are completely controlled by the First Selectman. So even though I agree with the concept of getting it to 0, taking $3,500 out in the line items, and I'm going to vote for that. I would have. Yeah, well, right. But I would have preferred to have not seen any increases in here. And again, to Mr. Walsh's point, this is completely controlled by the First Selectman and not by any obligations by the unions. So these numbers could have been held constant this year, just so we're all clear.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Yeah, Mrs. Marmon, please.
So I just want to comment on that because in terms of the step salary increases, it went up. For one employee, it went up 2 levels. It did go through HR, and we did hear an explanation of the job description, how it changed, that it did go through someone other than the first selectman. So I just want to make that clear to everybody that it wasn't a unilateral decision.
The chief of staff and the deputy chief of staff went up 2% this year, and they did not need to go up 2% this year. I agree with I agree with your administrative assistant. I don't agree with the large increase, but the other 2 roles in here were completely controlled by the first selectman, and they're 2% increases.
Mr. Walsh, you had something?
Yeah, Ms. Marmion, I don't doubt that the person has a certain skill level and whatever. My issue is whether we need to have all that skill set there. I mean, what I wouldn't want to hear is next year is that the job description changes and you need an accounting degree or you need a law degree or whatever, and then all of a sudden we make it the justification to add another $50,000 onto that salary just because they have the skill set. It's more what I'm looking at spending in a first selectman's office in general. And it's been a certain amount for a certain period of time, and now it's the first selectman who decided he wanted to have those extra skills. It's not anybody else. I mean, he could have hired a Secretary B, but he chose, for certain reasons that he explained, why he wanted that skill set.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on and go to the town clerk's office. Any adjustments to the town clerk's office at this point? Any amendments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go on. The next line is Fair TV. Any adjustments to Fair TV in this budget? Any adjustments? Seeing none, I'm going to go to Administrative Services. Any adjustment to Administrative Services? Any amendments? Seeing none, I'm going to go to the Registrar of Voters at this point. Any adjustment to the Registrar of Voters? Any adjustment? We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I have 2 adjustments. One will be on the overtime earnings, reducing it from 5,000, reducing it by 1,000 to 4,000.
Okay. Is there another one? Overtime earnings, he wants to reduce by 1,000, and I want to get one motion out of this. Mr. Walsh, you said you had two.
And the other is on the travels and meetings lines, reducing that by $500.
Okay, total adjustment, 4,500. Do we have a second to Mr. Walsh's motion? Do we have a second? We'll go with Mr. Becker on this one. Mr. Walsh, you care to speak to the motion since it's yours?
I think during the explanation of the overtime earnings, while we had that presentation, that I thought that there was a little bit too much overtime earnings. I got an explanation of why some of those things are not going to be happening, and I just think that the department and the 4 members that are basically getting, there's whatever you call them, a stipend or a salary, regular payroll, are just going to have to do the work to get it done. In regards to the travel and meetings, I believe that based on the stress of this budget, they're going up 4% already. They're going to have to cut down on their travel and meetings.
Anybody else? Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this reduction?
What was the amount on travel and meeting?
$4,500 total, $500 travel and meetings, $4,000.
No.
Oh,
no,
1,000.
It was $1,000 on
My mistake.
overtime earnings.
Right,
Good thing you corrected me.
$500, so it's a total of $1,500.
thank
I
you.
think the registrars were in the back having a heart attack when they heard me say 4,000. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? Seeing none, we have a $1,500 adjustment in front of us for the registrar of voters, $1,000 overtime, $500 travel and meetings. All in favor of this adjustment? All opposed? Abstentions? We have one opposition, Mr. Hopkins. That item carries 8-1. We'll go to Zoning Board of Appeals. Anything here? Zoning Board of Appeals, that's gone. We'll go to Town Planning and Zoning. Anything in Town Planning and Zoning right now? Anything, that's gone. We'll go to the Probate Court. Anything in the Probate Court? Seeing none, we'll go to the Historic District Commission. Anything in the Historic District Commission? None. We'll go to Conservation. anything in conservation right now?
I have a question in
Please, Mr.
conservation,
Becker.
specifically dealing with this term vacancy hold that we've heard. I thought we had heard it here, and this is actually first where it came up, in that it seemed like the administration had made this adjustment, put this vacancy hold in place, but with what appeared to be a plan by the conservation director, probably to come back with those positions next year, just that he could kind of get through it this year. But then when the vacancy hold term came up for the library and Parks and Rec, the first selectman alluded to the fact that vacancies hold essentially means that the positions are never coming back. So where do we sit with that, particularly with conservation, in that we've got a budget in front of us with two positions that I was under the impression were potentially coming back, next year, and that was what the director was looking for.
I think with respect to conservation, is Brian here? No, okay, with respect to conservation, the intent there was to put it on hold for now with the anticipation that it may be needed, but not with the certainty that it will be needed. My understanding and my recollection of what happened to the Board of Selectmen, the selectmen who made the motion to put these things on vacancy hold said if they determine they need it, they can always come back and ask for it. And that it could be taken out of contingency if they did need it. And then it was the first selectman who said, well, if this goes out, and it's going to be hard to get more money in. So it was a little bit of a mixed message, depending on which selectman you were.
But the original intent, as described at this board, was the vacancy hold was unfunding the position for a year, not saying, quote unquote, the technicality of not eliminating the position,
Correct.
but saying we're going to leave it vacant for a year due to what we're up against.
Yeah, and that was what was said, and
Right.
it was my understanding. It seemed
Right.
that what the first selectman said at the next meeting, I understand the circumstances were a little bit different, but in the utilization of sort of that term gave me a little bit of concern here, because I sort of agree with the concept that that you potentially leave it within the book, because once it's out, officially, it's zeroed out of the book, even as a head count, they've sort of got to come back and fully justify the thing.
But let's be clear, either way, you're going to have to raise the budget in future years
it's
in
a
order to
cliff.
put the
There's
position
no-
back in.
There's no doubt.
Right, so whether you want to call it an increase in headcount or not, it's effectively what it is,
Of course.
right?
Yeah, so there was a difference in the
No,
terms,
thank you
so
for
I
that.
wanted just the administration
Yeah.
to, at least, speak up on that and explain, so thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Bob.
Anybody else? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, it was kind of a new term I'd heard for the first time this year, this vacancy hold. It just started being thrown around, and the Board of Selectmen talked about it, and I never heard this term before, where we zero out a position, but yet we expect it to be there the next year. Kind of reminded me of a lyric from a Bruce Springsteen song, where it says, "These jobs are going, boys, and they ain't coming back." Which is what the first selectman was saying at the Board of Selectmen meeting, because of the tough times we're in with the state. You can say it's a vacancy hold, but I think it's going to be a fight next year to get fresh money into this budget. And this is a bit of what some of us know as the cliff, where we take this stuff out, and if you expect it to come back next year, you're building yourself, if we're not taxing for it this year, a cliff of new, fresh dollars that need to come in next year. And there's a number of spots in this budget where if we do what the Board of Selectmen has recommended us to do, that cliff starts to become extremely high, and it's going to increase next year's tax rate dramatically. Dramatically. And that's why I think the first selectman, why he was making his comments at the Board of Selectmen table, was saying, you're effectively saying that that position's gone. Not just making yourself feel good to say it's a vacancy hold. Oh, it'll be back next year. That's the problem with this new term called vacancy hold, because I think the departments are going to think it's going to be back next year, but they're going to be fighting like hell to get it back in, because the number next year could be extremely high.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, conservation is done. Let's go to the Shellfish Commission. Okay, I think we can pass on the Shellfish Commission. Let's go to legal services. Anybody on legal services? All right. Miscellaneous contingency, $35,000. I'm on page 116, miscellaneous contingency. Mr. Walsh, you had a question on miscellaneous contingency.
Yes, I'm going to make a motion to reduce that by $10,000, which is actually some of the money I'm trying to bring back for the increase in the first selectman's line again. It's the remaining $10,000. And we're just going to have to make that number work. So I'm going to make a motion to reduce that by $10,000.
Do I have a second to that motion? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt on that. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this motion? Yeah, Mr. Brown.
For Mr. Mayor, where are we with this line
This year.
item this year?
You have to look that up. It's
I think it was 18,000. We asked the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
question during a
We did, and I seem to recall
Yeah.
a similar number, if not that.
18,000.
I believe.
yeah, it was,
Remember, this is the account that's used for searches for new employees, things that come up in that.
it's a
sort
lot of, it's a
Incidental
lot of it is legal expenses for fees, not attorney's fees, but filing fees.
Right.
Expert witnesses, that kind of stuff, with the exception of the
Stop
DA
getting us into
adjustments.
trouble, Bob.
Right.
Okay.
And then we did use it for when looking for an
Search
IT
fees.
director, because
Yep.
we're not able to find, so yeah, it's, and we used it for blight. But I think Ms. Marmion's number's correct, it's that through January, it was about $18,000.
Right. Thank you. So the motion is before us, and we have that information.
So that's good information. I'm just not comfortable looking at the prior year's budget in terms of what was actually spent. It's
Yep.
significantly higher than the $25,000 that Mr. Walsh is recommending, so I'm concerned we're setting ourselves up there.
Thank you, Mrs. Marmion. Anybody else? Mrs. Leclerc?
Is it the account where we take costs for, like, tax appeals out of, Bob?
Sorry, what?
Is it the account? No, we don't take, like, okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to call for a vote on this one.
No, that's fine.
Right? All in favor of reducing this line item by $10,000? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All opposed? I'm going to vote against this one. And 4 opposed on this one. That item carries, so that one's reduced by $10,000. Okay. Let's go to active employee benefits. Questions, comments, concerns? Bob, did we have a recommended adjustment here that was just a reclass? I'll make that. We can clean it up. Is that right? Was it here?
No, that was made in Board of Selectmen.
Okay, was there one in pension? There was a...
It's going to be one in pension.
Okay, so it's not here. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, concerns on this one? Mr. Walsh?
I would just like to have a conversation, because in regards to the positions that were cut at the Board of Selectmen table, and also, first of all, I have a question. When the vacancy hold in the Conservation Department, did they cut insurance as well? Did you guys cut any insurance in that area? No. Okay.
So that's a cushion in the budget.
So that's a cushion in the budget. And then there's the positions that were changed by at the Board of Selectmen levels. I noticed that they did not make any change to any of the active employee benefits area. So that's a further cushion in the budget, because what that all makes it look like is that we're paying, and I just hear me out, because I know I've asked Bob this question on the phone, but it makes it look like we're paying for insurance, if we're not going to reduce those lines, for employees that are not going to be here, like paying for insurance for ghosts, basically, who don't need insurance. And in talking to Bob, you about this, you said it was a recommendation that because of the internal service fund and what's happening to it this year, and with the Board of Education, even though we're not paying for their insurance, we're paying for their insurance in their budget through the Connecticut Health 2.0, whatever the formal name for that is, we're letting them use $1.4 million out of our internal service fund, which is going to take our internal service fund, which was barely in the black at like $64,000 and now put it into the red again, correct?
No. Well, yes, I mean, but not totally correct, but
Okay.
mostly
Well,
correct.
How is it work?
Yeah, and I think I did. The, three things. One, I don't like using the word ghost, because that kind of sounds like you're paying money for somebody that's not there. And this isn't premium insurance, we're actually paying insurance. This is self-insurance, so you only pay when people go to the doctor, and you don't pay if people don't go to the doctor. So you're also correct regarding the flip with the Board of Ed leaving the Internal Service Fund, having gone to State 2.0, and I think I did quote the 1.4 million, but I should have divided it up into two pieces. The Board of Ed used half of it, and we used half of it to balance this year's budget to help make up for the $5 million in the loss of the state revenue. And so the balance of the account was like 62,000, I think, and it flipped July 1 to a negative 1.4 million because of that, the use of those funds. So the Internal Service Fund is now granted, would come a long way with the Internal Service Fund. A couple of years ago, we were negative $7+ million, but at the end of this year, we'll be 1.4 million. So that's one thing. So having some extra money in there potentially, I think, is a good thing to get that to start going down again. Secondly, the numbers are an estimate, and you don't really know if you're losing someone that was a big user or not a big user. If the person wasn't a user, then you don't really save any money anyway. So, but mostly because you're going from a positive to a negative, it makes sense to just leave those funds there. You're not certain of the savings. It's an estimated amount, and the Internal Service Fund needs to be, at some point, get into flat territory.
And I understand that, yeah, if one of these positions was not a big user, that, yeah, there's no change. If they were a big user, though, it'd be a big savings. And you don't know year to year whether someone's going to be or not. Can you tell me how many, when you were basing this number for health insurance, how many employees were you basing it on?
3 more than what we now have.
Okay. So right now, we'll just be, if we do nothing and we leave it alone, there will be basically paying for 3 employees, well, the average amount for...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, budgeting for it, not
Budgeting
necessarily
for
for
it.
it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Not paying, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
And then, have we done that before?
I think I remember when I was on the Board of Finance, and healthcare was in the departments. And it seems to me whenever we made an adjustment to a membership change or to a staff change, it was made, but it was. But since then, we haven't.
We
when it's
haven't
just-
since we realized that the Internal Service Fund had run into difficulties.
Right.
Once we pooled all the insurance, that we could get a better handle on it, right, on what it was costing us overall, right? And then we started to look at the Internal Service Fund and the issues that you correctly laid out in the Internal Service Fund. We stopped doing that because we realized that really we were looking at an amalgamation of one number. That was the liability for the entire town.
Right.
And we were already in arrears, so this was just a way to help remove some of that issue. That's what I recall.
Correct.
I'm willing, I think, to leave it alone for this 1 year. But I think in the future, if we're going to do this, depending on the number of employees, the way we've done this before is if the Internal Service Fund needs support, we fund that support. We put a number in for it. If we've added dollars in for Internal Service Fund
Correct.
before.
Into the insurance
I think
fund.
that if we, in the future, we'll just I'm fine with letting it go this year, but I think in the future, if we need support in that area, we should budget for that support. Not just have employees that are not here and not taking into account, because how are we going to figure out what the average cost is now? Are we going to base it on the 3 plus that, or are
Well,
we
you get the
gonna-
actuals for the next year.
We do the actuals.
You're going to base that on the actual number of
We always
employees?
do.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right, it's just, in the past, I know when healthcare was budgeted per department, we used to, when we let one of the employees go, make a commensurate reduction in health insurance.
Just like Social Security and
But I think
life
because of this
insurance.
year, we'll see how it works out, and hopefully we'll have a positive year with the other health, with the internal service fund.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good discussion. Any other questions, comments on this area? Seeing none, we'll go to Human Resources. Anything in Human Resources right now? Anything in Human Resources? I know I have one I want to talk
you go
about.
first.
No, does somebody else? I want to talk about educational and memberships. I want to make a motion. We talked about this, right? And it was paying for somebody's legal training, and that's not our
Continuing legal education.
right. That's not our obligation, and that's an education and membership. So I want to take that number down from 12,500 down to last year's number of 7,100. If I do that math right, that's $5,400, correct?
Correct.
So I'd like to make a motion to reduce education and memberships in the Human Resources line by $5,400. Do I have a second? Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments, concerns on this? Yes.
So, just so I understand this, is that some legal education that is to be provided to the head of the department who's a lawyer? Is that what the idea is behind that, Bob?
Yes, it was, you got the, and you're one of them now. So you now have those you now have
Yeah.
those educational requirements, continuing educational requirements, right? When we questioned this, this was put in here to pay for his continuing education costs. When in fact, he's also receiving a stipend on top of his salary for any legal counsel that he provides to the town as it relates to HR. And we had the discussion of not paying for the legal costs, and there was also, or rather, for the continuing education costs. There was also a discussion of actually how much those continuing education costs cost, and there was the opportunity, and you would know this better than I, to get them for a lot less than what's being budgeted here. So, yes, Ms.
So is there something in his job contract that states that we will pay for his continuing education?
No, there's nothing in the agreement. And you know, I kind of have to agree with what Mr. Walsh and the chair are saying.
Would be Mr. Flynn who said it. actually. So I know we look alike, but, you know.
I'm sorry. Flynn's, I mean, Walsh didn't notice the Cockney tonight, so I just kind of made an assumption there.
And this is different, so anyway.
But, you know, there's nothing in the agreement, was not discussed. And it's not just, it's not necessarily the courses that would be under consideration are not for continuing education purposes. Simply, it's to maintain his knowledge base and to stay current with respect to labor law and that type of things. You know, one of the reasons we hired him is because he's got an excellent in-state reputation. He stays current. He doesn't just take, he takes courses like 2 or 3 day seminar courses at Cornell and things like that. So I mean, he's one of the leaders in the state.
How much is his stipend, Mr. Mayor, for his legal?
$50,000.
That's on top of his salary, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
it's, and I understand what you're saying, everybody, but it's no different than, this has nothing to do with the fact that the state of Connecticut is requiring attorneys to have continuing legal education. I mean, this is the first year where we have to do it. We're mandated to do it and reach certain credits. I've been a lawyer for, oh God, I'm losing track. We're getting old. For a long time, and I would go to seminars every other year just to keep up on the law and legal requirements. So, I mean, I think it's an obligation of any employer to pay for stuff like this. That's my only concern.
so I'm a CPA. If I go and take outside cost, that's on my dime in order to keep my license, because I'm not employed right now to be a CPA.
I hear you, but it's more than keeping your license. It's to further your knowledge and to benefit your employer in the town of Fairfield. That's
That's
all.
what the stipend's for, over and above.
I think the stipend's for him actually doing legal work, right, Bob?
I'm going to go to Mrs. Marmion. Thank you, Mr. Mottola. I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, John, but I have to take CEUs to keep my license, and my employer doesn't pay for it, but it's because it's not in my contract, because I work mainly per diem. Some places hire me, and they say, we'll pay for your CEUs, and that's a benefit, but it's not, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's up to each professional to maintain their license, and unless it's in their agreement. And so, and he's getting a stipend, so I think that should cover it.
Thank you, Mrs. Marmion. Mr. Walsh.
I'd also like to say that the human resources job description does not call for it to be a lawyer. It happens to be in this case, and there happens to be a second lawyer in the department, which he also mentioned he wanted to get CLE credit for, who's the risk manager, another job that does not require it to be a lawyer. So people have been in that position before who are not lawyers. He just happens to be one, and so does the risk manager. But that's, if they want to maintain their legal license, they don't need to maintain their legal licenses to keep that job. In regards to the other job that he has, the stipend job, that is a legal job. Okay, and that he goes to arbitrate, or he may go to arbitrations and whatever. But he's getting a $50,000 stipend to almost basically say, almost like he's one of Stan's attorneys that works under him, to basically say, for $50,000, I'm going to do all that stuff. But that's like a private legal thing. And he should have to pay for expenses he has on that side. We're giving $50,000. That's not like that we have to pay anything out of that for like pension or anything else like that. He's getting $50,000 to do a certain amount of work. But his law degree is for him to maintain, just
Yeah,
like it's for
okay.
me to maintain. And Stanton doesn't. I asked Stan about this. Stan goes, "No, Jim, no one pays my CLE credits from the town of Fairfield, and I'm the town attorney."
I appreciate what you're saying, and I may vote for this, but I just wanted to have a discussion about it, and also I think we should note for the record that we're actually saving a lot of money by having him negotiate contracts other than outside attorneys. So we should make that clear.
I'm not saying that's not a fair point.
Right, and this isn't a personal-
No, I understand.
And
Yeah,
I also personally would like to hear from him during the year and get a little more background on the stuff that's non-legally
Sure.
related. But I think when you look at this line compared to every other line,
gotcha.
everyone else is taking a hit on that line.
I hear you.
And he's asking for 76% more. It's just a little bit too
I
much this
gotcha.
year. This
Okay.
is this year. But
Fair enough.
if he
Fair
wants to
enough.
make a point in the future
It
to
says it
increase
in
that
the
area,
text
I
detail.
understand.
Gotcha. Thank
Yeah,
you.
say it again.
But in the tax detail report, too, it
Yeah.
says this amount was increased slightly for 18 due to the new requirements for lawyers for 12 CLE credits. So the increase it's not about other stuff. It was very clearly in the
Yeah, I
in the
hear
you.
detail report. too.
Gotcha.
Just so
Thank you.
everyone knows.
Thank you, Mr. Becker, and I saw Mrs. Leclerc pointing that as well. Anybody else have anything on this? All right, so the motion is now before us to reduce educational and memberships by $5,400 in the Human Resources Department. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries unanimously. All right, anything else in Human Resources? Human Resources. Seeing none, we're going to go to Community and Economic Development. Anything in that department? Anything in that department? Seeing none. Going to go to Harbor Management Commission. Anything in Harbor Management Commission? They can sleep soundly tonight. Seeing none. All right.
The workers' comp, do we pay the workers' comp for the Board of Education?
Yes.
Okay. And where's unemployment compensation for the Board of Education? Where's that
Unemployment?
Downside.
Townside.
Downside where? What-
Separate,
We have a separate budget for it,
separate budget.
in the 300 area.
In the 300 area?
Yep.
Can you point that out when we get to there? Thank you.
I'm going to pass on contingency for now. If it's, I want to handle that last after we get done with all the other departments. Is that okay with everybody? So please remind me to go back to that. My memory is not what it used to be. Contribution is to surplus. I want to ask, was this adjusted based on what the Board of Selectmen did? Okay. Is there another adjustment to this to be made? Mr. Mayor, I think you alerted us to something here. Unrecommended adjustments?
Oh, I almost forgot. Yeah, I was playing with numbers the other day, and the numbers just didn't add up.
Always scary when you're the chief
Scary.
fiscal officer.
That's right. And then when I realized what it was, because of it was only being carried out to 2 digits.
Okay.
So when you actually carried out to 3 digits, we were short, I think, what, $20,000?
$25,000.
So we're short
$25,000. So we're short
$25,000.
$25,000.
To addition to surplus.
In addition to surplus to maintain the, what is it, the 9.53%.
Okay,
that we
hold
plan to
that
be on.
thought, and I'm going to come back to this when we do the end as well, because this will kind of fall out after we adjust everything else, correct?
Well, I think this is after contingency's dealt, we've got to deal with this last.
Exactly.
To our policy.
Right, exactly. So let's go on from there. All right, Regional Youth and Adult Social Action Partnership? Pequot Library.
Can I just make a statement?
Yes.
About this entire area of non-profit agencies, which I do support, and I think they do a great job for our community. But depending on what happens with this year's budget and depending on next year's budget, I'd be remiss to say that if we start taking major hits from the state, especially in this pension area, and we don't know where this is going, in the future, it's going to be at least difficult for me not to cut this back to some degree if I'm having to cut my Board of Education. Because I have a hard time seeing how I'm supposed to cut the Board of Education dollars down in the future if we get significantly hit by the state, but yet be giving money out to charitable organizations. And I would suggest that the charitable organizations that are out there hearing this, that they talk to their representatives and the governor's office, because it's going to influence how much I think we can give them in the future if we get significantly hit. So I'm just making a statement as a part of our structural discussions in the future, but it's just hard if we get hit by multi-millions of dollars of additional costs that the state was supposed to be responsible for, and they come down our way not to at least start looking at it affecting these budgets.
I got a follow-up to you, but I want to go to Mr. DeWitt first. Mr. DeWitt.
I have a follow-up to Mr. Walsh as well. I completely agree with your analysis. I would add that any of our not-for-profits out there listening should consider, and this was a recommendation from our committee, a cost-benefit analysis. If you are providing a service to the town that we give you $7,000 for, that would turn into a town service of $100,000. That's a very good thing for you to raise in the coming year.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt, because you went exactly where I wanted to go. Mr. Walsh, I agree with the sentiment of what you're saying as regards funding. I also agree that it would be nice if our not-for-profits stepped up and applied their similar pressure to the state. I would say where I would look for it is somewhat what Mr. DeWitt did. One of the areas of structural improvement could be public-private partnerships, where some of the services that we currently provide on a governmental level could be assumed at a cheaper cost by a local not-for-profit organization. And I would hope that we would consider that as part of our structural improvement to government, that there might be some of these organizations that could provide this service more efficiently and better than a town is equipped to provide it. So I think we've got to look at the whole thing. That doesn't say your point is invalid. It's just, I think structurally we got to look at it all, in my opinion. So, thank you. Mrs. Marmion.
Thanks. I want to kind of echo what you've all said in terms of the services. And I remember when Mr. DeWitt chaired the, I don't know what it was called, the nonprofit commission, something like that. And one of the things that your committee came up with is, well, set forth some criteria, which is that this nonprofit ideally would be providing a service that the town does not provide, and that there's great value in what they deliver in terms of the actual benefit to the people in this town. I do want to bring up, and I know we'll get there, but I just want to throw this out there, that with Pequot Library, I have received a lot of emails from people, and I hear it every year, and every year I talk about it, so I apologize if I sound like a broken record. Pequot Library delivers a service that is invaluable to this town. It's that example of the private-public partnership that you mentioned, and I truly appreciate that. My concern is that I would like to get more detail from Pequot in terms of what the $350,000 amount that the town gives to them every year delivers. I want to know specific services, because truly, if we're going to say what distinguishes them, and I know it goes into a pool, but I think that we should get more specifics in terms of what that money is going towards. And I would like to hear, because this is $350,000. It's not the $5,000. It's not the $15,000 that the other nonprofits are asking us for. It's such a large amount of money that I really think that we need to feel confident, I know I do, that there is a comprehensive plan for this organization. Is this going to continue given the state constraints that we're facing, every year, year after year? I want to hear more analysis on what we're getting in return. So I'm kind of, somebody said before that putting people on fair warning or whatever it is, departments, but I really want Pequot to come back to us with a strategic plan that satisfies kind of where they're going in the future, how they're using this money, or can they lessen that ask, and how are they going to do that? I would like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeWitt, briefly, so we can move on.
Yeah, quick follow-up. I would be happy as the former committee chair to brief the first selectman or selectman strategic planning committee, make sure they understand what recommendations we made, because it does echo a lot of the points that have been said here tonight, and a lot of those people may not have heard that.
All right, so I'm going to go back through and flip, okay?
I just have a comment.
On what?
With regards to what Ms. Marmion said. And I'm glad to hear that you do value that service, but I will just once again point out that for $350,000, we get an entire branch library. I mean, we can compare it now that we have a branch library that we budget out. Fairfield Woods Library costs $978,000. So if we're going to really go through that financial analysis, maybe we should look to see about what branch library might work better, because obviously $350,000, you get an entire branch library versus $978,000. So if we're really trying to save money, we can analyze that next year.
Thank you, Mr.
And I
Walsh.
think that's a great point. Sorry, Mr. Flynn,
Yep.
if I may. They are different. I mean, Pequot provides programs that are unique. The branch library provides unique programming, but of course, the branch library is the busiest branch library in the state, in that their tools of the trade are materials, which we'll get to. So there are differences between them. So I just want to kind of, and I think we should do an analysis. And I know our public library is putting together a strategic plan for 2018. So they're going through that as well. And I think driving the revenue, a lot of good ideas came up under this panel. But I'm just looking at, just as we look at the Board of Ed, $350,000. It's a lot of money. So I just want to see where that money is going that meets the criteria that Mr. DeWitt's committee laid out. I think it would be very helpful.
Thank you. Let's move on. Pequot Library, anything? LifeBridge Community Services. The Discovery Museum. The Audubon Society. Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority. Fairfield Museum and History Center. Regional Mental Health Board. The Janus Center for Youth in Crisis. Grassmere by the Sea.
Grassmere by the Sea, I would just like to, I'm not making a motion to reduce it. I thought they gave a great presentation, and the work they do is actually phenomenal, especially to the Fairfield residents that they take care of. I would just hope they would continue on trying to get some of the other communities, because right now we're the only municipality that is giving them funds. And it would be great if the other communities that are getting services would support them as well, and I hope they follow through on that, about that ask.
Thank you. Sullivan McKinney Elder Housing. The Kennedy Center. Mill River Wetland Committee. The Pilot House. Center for Family Justice. Private school bus transportation. Health and Welfare Services. And that's the end of that section of the book. Mr. Becker.
Before we exit the nonprofits, I would just want to note that as you've now quickly flipped through everything, that most of those budgets have stayed the same for years, which in effect is potentially a decrease in funding inflation-wise, but is also a tremendous accomplishment by them to be able to continue to seek funds in other areas to deal with that and not to become a digital.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. All right, we're now into some administrative and finance departments. We'll start first with the finance department. Any comments on the finance department? Anything at all? Seeing none. We did do private school. We did. Purchasing. Anything on the purchasing department at this point? We're going to go to the assessor's office. Anything on the assessor's office at this point? And we're going to go to the tax collector. Anything on the tax collector? I want to make a comment here. We've been reiterating it all night. We've got a lot of new department heads, particularly the assessor's area and the tax collector. We both have new positions in both those departments recently.
We haven't filled the assessor yet.
Right, but we're going to, and I would just like to encourage, again, new people coming in, new ideas, new ways to be efficient. You know, one of the things in my early jobs which would get you fired is if you were asked, why are you doing it that way, and your response was, because that's the way we did it last year. And that would always get, you know, the partner or whoever looking at you saying, well, I don't need you, I can just go and get who did it last year. So I would hope that as we swap out these department heads, they're given carte blanche to go through and review all the operations for where they can make operational improvements.
It's part of the interview process.
Good. Any other questions on assessor or tax collector? Seeing none, we'll go to information technology, another area with a new department head. Is there anything on information technology? Anything on information technology? Mr. Becker?
I'm not going to make any motions here. We have in the past moved funds over to the contingency line. I am concerned with sort of that we're asking for the same thing as the previous year, and that there is sort of this looming new department head looking at it again and coming up with a plan. I would just say I would hope that before the new PC purchases and whatnot actually take place, even though we're not moving them into a contingency line, that perhaps maybe at a quarterly, but we get briefed on sort of what plan he's come up with and what direction he's going to take with these. You know,
Thank you, Mr.
yeah,
Becker.
that'd be helpful.
I appreciate that. All right, now for the ever
Can I
popular.
just make one other statement? It's just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought it was a very good presentation, and I think, you know, the amount of time we're spending on this tonight is evident of the fact that we're feeling a little bit more confident in this department. But one of the areas I was remiss in asking questions to from the department head, and something we've asked for before, is kind of a disaster recovery presentation and plan. And I know from speaking, when he spoke to us, he's got a lot of town departments are coming to him that he's new and wanting changes and things. But I would like to try to get that done in the next year if we could, or at least some start of that plan, and get some presentation on how long it might take him. Sometime in the future, in a month, maybe we don't have a lot of things to do. He seems very competent, and seems like he'd be able to at least guide us in that area, and maybe we can get that done.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Good idea. Let's follow up on that. All right, if we're done with information technology, now on to the ever-popular Board of Finance. Anything in here? All right, nothing in there. There's a shock. Okay, unemployment compensation. There was a question on this earlier. Remember that this was, what I have in here is it's like at 8 people or $50,000, correct? That's what the rough number of the adjustment, and then some administrative fees with it, is what I understand. That's what my notes are from the presentation, right? Mr. Walsh, I know you had a question.
And my question goes to the fact that now that the Board of Selectmen restored the $2 million on the Board of Education side, Was any of the amounts in here that were in the First Selectman's original budget, knowing that he was going to cut $2 million, did you increase the unemployment compensation line at all because you were cutting them by, the Board of Ed, by $2 million?
Yeah, about 80,000, 75,000 of the 282.
75,000? Okay, so 75,000, did you say?
So is that, are you telling us that that's no longer needed because of the actions with the 2 million and what's going on there?
Well, this is one of those accounts that you're estimating and guesstimating, but yes, there was a defined, specific $75,000 addition to that account, anticipating layoffs.
Okay.
Okay, because it looked like the line went up 41.13%. So based on that, I'd like to make a motion to reduce the unemployment compensation line by $75,000.
I'll second that. Any discussion, comments, concerns on that? Mr. Hopkins?
May I ask a question, maybe through you, Mr. Mayor? What happens if the RTM comes along and cuts the other 2 million back again, or just 1 million, and it causes how do we get money back into this account after that?
Well, that's one of, go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Contingency.
Yeah.
So it would come out of contingency, is what you're saying?
With the RTM process, they can reduce something which may require an addition somewhere else, but they can only reduce, they can't add, so.
Right.
So that's why we need a contingency. One of the reasons we need a contingency fund.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the good question, Mr. Hopkins. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mrs. Leclerc?
Well, I'm still concerned about cutting it because we really don't know where the state's going yet.
Right.
And so maybe a cushion there isn't the worst thing to have. So, I don't know. I'm a little reluctant to cut it right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc. Mr. Walsh?
But the problem is that we're not going to know where the state's going. The estimate is now till September. So all of our budgets will be completed, and the state, and once we approve and the RTM approves the Board of Education money, they're fully funded. It's their money. We can't reduce it or take any back.
Yeah, but
So-
this isn't a town budget, even though it's Board of Ed.
No, I
it's
know,
funded
but
by
their
the town.
unemployment shouldn't change because they'll be fully funded to whatever number that is. The real risk here is just the RTM.
Right.
Excellent.
And I think that you're going to have to warn the RTM of that issue.
And when they reduce, they can actually take it into account if they reduce, that they would need more in the unemployment.
And gift it to us.
Do the net.
Through contingency.
Do the net. Right. Anything?
Oh, the net, right.
All right. All in favor of reducing this line item by $75,000? Opposed? Abstentions. So that carries 7-2, so that reduction is made. At this point, we're heading into public safety. It's 9 o'clock by our rules. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess, and we'll get right back at it. My apologies, this is taking a little bit longer than I had thought.
Okay.
75,000.
Team Jim. All right, I'm going to call us back in. We're in the public safety area of our budget now, and we're going to turn to page 211, which is the fire department. Is there anything on the fire department this evening? Any questions, comments, concerns, or motions on the fire department? Seeing none, we'll go to the police department. Is there any questions, comments, concerns this evening? Amendments to the police department budget? Seeing none, we'll go to animal control. Anything on animal control this evening? Seeing none, we'll go to the ever-popular streetlights. Do we need streetlights? Do we need to pay this money? Anybody questions? You have lights on your cars, why do you need streetlights? Flashlights, too, there we go. All right, nothing on streetlights. Hydrants and water? Hydrants and water? Anything? Nothing? We'll go to emergency management. Anything on emergency management? Emergency management. Nothing on emergency management. We'll go to the ECC, the Emergency Communications Center. Page 233. Anything on the ECC this time? Seeing none? Nothing there. That was painless. We're done with public safety. And so, thank you and good night to that group being here. We'll go to Public Works Administration. We are on pages 239 through 242. Public Works Administration. Anything on Public Works Administration? Seeing none. We'll go to Public Works Operations. Public Works Operations, that's page 246 and 247. I know that there's been some questions on capital. Mr. DeWitt.
Sorry, I'm just catching up with all this talking you've been doing here for the last couple minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to state that I do concur with the chairman's statements tonight and Mr. Walsh's statements, all of it. But there are some things that we just have to fund in this budget. I'm not comfortable with the reductions we made in capital outlay. The Public Works Operations has come to us with a long-term plan. We've, for all intent and purpose, ignored that for the last couple of years. So I'd like to make a motion to add back into the budget, and any one of you, Mr. Michelangelo, Mr. Bartlett, if you'd like to tell me I'm doing the wrong thing, please do. But I'd like to add back in the street sweeper for $208,000. And so add an additional reinstate $208,000 under capital outlay for a street sweeper.
Do we have a second to that motion? We have Mr. Mottola on that second. Do we have any conversation on that motion? Have any thoughts on that motion? Mrs. Marmion.
So I believe out of all of the capital items, the various dump trucks, et cetera, Mr. Bartlett said that it was the street sweeper that he, if he had his druthers, that was the one.
And they're shaking their heads in the right direction
That
back
was
there,
the
so.
one item, please restore this. And I guess I'm going to go with that because I feel comfortable restoring an item, perhaps just one item, and if that's what they want and we have the opportunity, if it helps get us back to some degree on the right road.
Right. And one other
Then
thing I
that
just
would
wanted
make
to
sense.
point out, much to your point, thank you for saying that. We keep talking about structural changes. I agree with that 100%. But we've also been, there's a term we've been using this year, me a lot especially, is kicking the can. Not funding this is just kicking the can. It's not like we're not going to need this next year, and if we don't fund it, it's not like we're going to not need it the year after. So I'm done kicking the can in this particular one, and that's my reason for reinstating this.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh.
I'd also say that I called Mr. Bartlett in regards to this, in regards to where we stand with our trucks and the operations of the department. And we had a budget last year where we funded a number of things. One of those things was a street sweeper too. So this would be, if we don't fund this, this will be the second street sweeper. And I asked Mr. Bartlett, who was, how can we go without two street sweepers? And he was very candid. He said, I'll make it work however you guys want to make it work. But at some point in time, he's got a legal obligation to sweep the roads, to get the sand off so it doesn't go in. I think it's either under state or federal laws, so it doesn't clog the system and things like that. And I said, well, what would you do if we don't fund it? He's like, well, I have to rent a backhoe. I'm like, how much is that? He goes, we've done that before. Backhoe to rent for a summer is $50,000. That's 1/4 of the cost, just for one summer. If he needs to rent two, it's $100,000. It just gets extremely expensive to start doing this.
That was quick math. I was impressed.
Math in public.
Tom, that's what happens when you go to Boston College. So I definitely am in full support. I'm still hoping that he gets his second street sweeper that we did fund last year. But I guess we're going to have to wait to see how the funds, with the state cutting some of the money and us, trying to run a surplus to kind of cover some of the things that were held back by the first selectman. But I think the street sweepers, I don't want to spend $50,000. I don't want to spend, 25% of the cost of a street sweeper in one summer just for a rental to give it back to somebody at the end of the thing, when Scott can run a machine like that for 12 to 14 years.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other comments on this? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote to add $208,000 specifically for the street sweeper to the Public Works operations budget. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We have one opposition, Mr. Becker. Oh, abstained. Okay. Mr. Becker abstained. So that is 8-0-1 on that vote. Anything else in Public Works operations? Anything else?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Walsh.
I would like to add the remaining pieces of equipment that were cut at the Board of Selectmen table, specifically the six-wheel dump truck for $195,000, the second six-wheel dump truck for $195,000, and the backhoe for $136,580. And correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, I think those numbers total $526,580.
And they weren't cut at the Board of Selectmen, they were cut by the first selectman, is that correct?
That's right.
They were cut before it hit the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I think Mike made a motion to add them back in. That's
Correct.
why I'm getting confused by it.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
Mike had cut him, and then with the thought that the $9 million might be coming back, he,
Do we have a second to Mr. Walsh's motion?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, Mrs. Leclerc,
And
second.
I appreciate you doing it at least for discussion, because I want everybody to kind of hear me out. We started with as we was mentioned earlier, we are very behind in the replacement of our trucks for the Public Works Department, and we asked them to come up with a plan on how we were going to replace them, which they spent a considerable amount of time and made a presentation to this board, to the RTM, where we all kind of signed on that we were going to be doing that plan. That was 2 years ago. Since that point in time, last year, we funded it, but have yet to buy a truck and may not buy any trucks. This year, I'm glad to see one street sweeper went back in, but if we don't fund this, and if we don't buy the trucks that we're supposed to have bought in this current fiscal year, I think we will be 7 trucks behind. We will have bought 1 truck out of 8, and that, as I told you, is not a plan. That's not following a plan. This board has been very good about following plans. As our chairman has often said, one of the best plans we've ever had was the golf course plan, where we put $100,000 in, and now we have basically a golf course that's been winning awards. I think we've got to, if we're going to have plans and we're going to ask departments to put together plans, and we adopt those plans, we've got to live by those plans, whether it's good times or bad. Same thing with paving. We've got to live with those plans. And so I think for that purpose, we should fund these trucks again and buy the trucks. At some point in time, the trucks are breaking down. They're costing much more to repair than the cost of getting something new. And there's another reason I would like to go in this area and to fund this area. And that is because if there are motions tonight to put a bunch of money into contingency because of cautionary reasons, I'm extremely worried that that'll send a message to the state that we are putting money away and that we are willing to pay some portion of these pensions or not. I want to stick with our plan. If Hartford does certain things and we need to go into and we need to pay certain amounts of money for a pension, for other areas of municipal aid that they may cut, there's at least money in our budget for solid things like these trucks for the first selectman to put a hold on. Because right now, there's no money to put a hold on in any areas. So I would rather, personally, make the decision where we'd like that money spent. Because if we have the money, this is where I would like it spent, as opposed to being told, putting in a contingency account or something else like that, and then being told by the first selectman, this is where I'd like it to go, or whatever. We know we need these trucks. We should try to stay on a plan, and that's one of the reasons I think that I would like this money restored and go forward that way. So that's the reason for my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. DeWitt?
Just as a discussion point, Mr. Walsh, would you feel better if we took this amount specifically and put it into contingency?
I would have a problem with it. I think that's sending a message. You don't think, if you don't think the state's not paying attention to this, if you don't think that the states are going to look at all the other communities in this state to say, hey, how did those budgets work out? I mean, we had Bob in the finance department see how the other towns were handling the pension amounts. It didn't take them that long. I mean, I appreciate the effort. I'm not saying it wasn't a lot of effort to get that information. But with these legislators up in Hartford and having all their aides and things like that, it wouldn't take long to see how Fairfield County's handling this. As some of the information that came by on that back survey said, there was maybe one other community that was putting money into contingency. Most of them were ignoring it. So I would rather put it the way we want to put it. If we get hit with something, as we saw what happened last year with the $1 million, the first selectman, we saw what happened. We also saw that he cut it now when he first had the chance on the budget when he was getting hit with $14 million of municipal aid. Us having to give $9 million and a cutback of the $4 million. So I'd rather put it in the budget. I don't want to send any message to Hartford that we are putting money into contingency for some plan that they might have, and I want to show them as well that yes, if you do hit us with some pension money, if you do take away municipal aid, it will have effect on this community, because it will. These trucks won't be there. Snowstorms of next year, trucks may be breaking down, we might not have the equipment that we're supposed to do. I think it's the right thing to put the money in and deal with it, and if the first selectman gets hit with, we get hit with numbers later on and we need to find money, at least there's a place to go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else? Mrs. Marmon? Nothing? Mrs. Leclerc?
Well, I think Jim Walsh raises very good points, because I was set to put money into contingency, but I do prefer to spend money how we want to spend it, and this is where I would spend it. So I'm wondering if we could do something similar to what we did in IT a couple years ago and put it in a contingency line right in Public Works and say, this is where we'd like to spend the money, but maybe not on July 1st. Maybe let's wait and see till the year goes on. Is that possible?
They do not have to come back to our board to do that.
To do
should
that.
we put it in the department.
Okay, so it'd have to go.
The only
in-
way they have to come back to our board is to actually put it into contingency.
So, so when we did the IT contingency, that
We
was
actually
in
put
the-
it into contingency.
Okay.
Yeah, there is also some in the department which, I don't want to say as a courtesy, but it's for informational purposes, we brought back to you guys to inform you what we were
Correct.
doing.
But it's not
Just because I
required.
know your
It's
interest.
not.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Yes, Mrs. Marmon?
So I like where this is going, but I'm not sure, and maybe we need to talk to the Department of Public Works, if the entire amount, is there a compromise in terms of the capital outlay that we would fund? For example, there are 3 dump trucks. I know 2 are replacing ones that are rotted out, and then there's a 4-wheel versus a 6-wheel. But I guess I'm wondering if we couldn't potentially fund partially, not the full amount.
Before we go to that, thank you for that question, and happy to hear that discussion. But I want to go over to Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, where do we stand presently? Because the real gating item here is that a lot of this was approved, a lot of things were approved this past year that have not been acquired yet. So we're now kind of out of the bulk of snow season, he says, knocking wood. We were running a surplus as compared to where we thought we would be based on our last quarterly review. And you've heard the flavor of this board saying we want to make sure we keep up with the acquisitions of some of the the big equipment items that we funded last year. So where do we currently stand this year? Because that's one of the things.
Right, and then this is, I guess, tomorrow's the last day of March, and we'll soon have a quarterly review. But the last, and I actually looked at that a little bit today, we're looking like, including the holds on the trucks and the paving, et cetera, including the holds, we may have a $600,000 positive end
What does that
result
mean,
variance.
including? Does that mean by spending that or by not
By
spending?
not spending it.
Okay.
So if that gets carried over, and that's 600, so if that gets carried over, some of the holds are realized, actually, and some of the
Correct.
savings been realized.
Correct.
There's about 800,000, a little over $800,000 in items that hold, no, $900,000, 700,000 of which is DPW.
Right.
And so what would happen is when we do the third quarter analysis, then the decision will be made what to spend, what not to spend. There's a library in there, I think, for 100,000.
Correct.
700,000 for DPW, 75,000 for fire, and there's another 25,000, I'm not recalling what it's for, that would potentially be available for release.
Okay.
The other comment I'll make, which I'm not sure if this was the question, but just to clarify, I mean, I think the administration is very sensitive to the fact that we may get burned by the state again, and there certainly would be at the beginning of the fiscal year a conversation with the various department heads about putting things on hold until we kind of get through the whole budget process and through the first couple of quarters, because as you know, December 29th, 2016, we got hit with a $529,000 hit.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mrs. Marmion, I didn't want to ignore I wanted to put it into context. So can we ask whoever's here to represent DPW to come up?
Now, in the, on page 250 and 251 of the budget, and this is, the request was for $895,580, and the items which were eliminated from 1 through 9, excuse me, were the ones in the middle, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the ones that were not moved forward by the first selectman, so the rest of them are in there. So as we spoke about, the sweeper is the priority. Number 2 is another 6-wheel dump truck. And as far as the third and fourth item, I'll let Mr. Bartlett. Third is between 3 and 4. Scott, the other dump truck or the backhoe?
Yeah, we would prefer the 2 dump trucks over the backhoe in the priority 1 through 3.
Priority 1 through 3.
Correct.
Well, actually, 2, 3, wait,
So
2, 3, 5?
Yeah.
Or
So
2, 3, 4?
sweeper, truck, backhoe.
Truck, so 2 and 3 after the street sweep.
All right,
You'd rather have the trucks in the backhoe.
Can I ask one question?
yeah.
Scott, though, if we gave you the backhoe, okay?
Yes.
So I'm trying to get some money into the budget in case something happens with the state. We could deduct $18,000 out of your rental line, correct?
No, the rental line increase of 18,000 was in lieu of the payloader.
Was that as a payloader?
Not a backhoe.
Okay, I thought it was a backhoe.
No, it's a payloader.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions, comments? Chris DeWitt?
In the budget we're executing right now, 16-17 budget, 2 6-wheel dump trucks were approved. They have not been purchased, is that correct?
One was purchased. So the 3 big capital items on page 251 of the current budget.
Yep.
The number 10 item was in fact purchased, the one that replaced item 40 FA.
Yep.
Number 9 and number 11 have been the 400,000 put on hold.
Okay.
So this is a second request of things that weren't purchased this
And
past
that's,
year.
yeah, and that's where I'm going.
Right.
So
They could
if
still be purchased.
well, and so you're going right where I'm going. With a comment that Mr. Mayor just made about a potential 600,000 Is there any thought that some of that money might make it into Public Works operations in this fiscal year?
Yeah, that's what I thought I said, yes.
Oh, I didn't hear you say, I thought you just said there was an opportunity for money, but,
Yeah, I mean, if the money is there, it would go towards, that $900,000 that's on hold. 400,000, which is trucks, 300,000, which is paving, 100,000, which is library, and those are probably the top four.
so if you get your, okay, so the hope is to get street sweeper in this fiscal year. We just put back into the budget your second street sweeper. Do you have a real need for 4 new six-wheel dump trucks, 2 from this fiscal year and 2 in this, the one we're speaking about tonight?
Yes, we do, yes.
So there's really a need for 4?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this specific
And
item?
just to be clear, the ones that are on hold for this year are part of the plan, right?
That is correct, yes.
And the ones you're asking for are part 2 of the plan, correct?
Yes.
So in order to stay on plan, we need to get enough money to fund what we said we were going to fund last year, and to get all of these for this year.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Just a quick example, the 4 sweepers we run are 1998, 2001, 2003, 2004. The city of Norwalk just traded in their oldest machine, which was a 2007. So they traded in a machine that's 2 years newer than my newest machine. My oldest is a 1998. So the 2 sweepers I'm asking for replace a 98 and a 2001. Just as a quick comparison.
For the sweepers?
We can use the antique plates, right?
We can.
What's the general life of them?
I'd say we factor about 12 years. So you can see we're almost at the 20-year delta if we're looking at a 2018, and our first sweeper was a 1998.
Go ahead.
When you presented to the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, I thought you said that the plan that you currently have was so far off, you had to come up with a brand-new plan, right? We said toss that plan.
That's what I think I said that, actually.
Yeah. I think your board's frustration
said
was
it,
to toss the plan.
didn't mince words, right?
Tear it up.
Tear it up.
Tear it up.
So, I mean, now are we on the plan, are we off the plan? Where are we? I feel like we need a whole new, everything new. You got to come back and say, this is what I want to do, right? Or are we not there?
No, I'm comfortable creating a new plan, but I would say to you, if we get the 2 vehicles, the sweeper and the dump truck from the current budget, as well as the 4 pieces, the sweeper, the 2 trucks, and the backhoe, we can develop a new plan, but those 6 pieces put us back in line with our plan.
Okay, so you bought 1 piece, though, so that would be a 7th piece, correct? Because you already
We
bought 1 dump
we
truck.
did buy 1, that is correct, yes. See, what we're paying back, I thought this might come up, so we did a little quick history. 2009, no purchases. 2010, no purchases. 2012, no purchases. So that's where we're coming home to roost. It was all those years of no purchases. We're not talking 6-wheelers, 10-wheelers, backhoe, nothing. So 3 out of those 4 years, we purchased nothing in the over 100,000 capital. So the plan, even though, we've gotten some trucks recently, we are still playing catch-up. And Joe and I, in our last presentation last year, said it was about a 3 to 4 piece per year. So we expected 600,000 to 800,000 annually to replenish the plan. But to your question, this would do a great restoring the plan, and will create a plan for you from this point if these get approved.
Mrs. Marmion?
So how does this plan, we've got, the equipment work with your paving plan? Because there have been cuts in the paving plan, so to stay on plan, and I know you sent us a memo, and I want to get into paving, but, just take it as it is now, a reduction in your paving budget. Do you need all of these trucks, or is the plan, cockeyed? How does this fit together?
They're really unrelated. The bulk of our paving plan is actually subbed out to private contractors. So depending the treatment we're putting on the road, there's a host of bids, either town bids or state bids, and those contractors come in and do the work. So these trucks are needed to, whether they're cut and brush, street sweeping, replacing a drain, installing curbs, all those activities are what the highway department's doing, unrelated to the actual paving funding.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. DeWitt?
Just to clarify, Mr. Bartlett, in those years you named where you didn't purchase anything, we did allocate in the budget funds for you to buy something, correct? I can't remember, this is my 10th year, I can't remember one year that capital has been,
There's plenty of years where it's been that way.
Yeah, and
The RTM's cut it a number of times to zero
huh?
to try to say, bring down the tax rate.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
It may not have been this board, but
Yeah, it
the
might
end,
have been
the
this
end
board.
result.
It might have been other boards.
Okay, so is that true, those years had literally zero capital outlay?
Yeah, well, that's true, yes.
Okay.
So
They
there's,
had
So every-
small
Zero,
equipment.
zero capital outlay in the 100,000 and over.
Right.
To
Right, so we weren't buying, you might have bought
Pickup.
blowers and a pickup truck, right, right,
that
right.
is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Matola?
Jim, I kind of agree with you. I like the concept. The only thing I'm going to say is, as I start flipping the page of this budget book in a few minutes, if we're going to apply that concept here, I might want to apply that concept going forward to a couple other places that concern me. This is a big chunk of change here. So I'm just going to state that.
And I'll be clear with my cards, I have more to come too. Okay. So, I don't know where we're on the same page, but I will tell you that I have a little bit more to go, and I don't know whether everybody will go along, but whatever.
So I will say for myself, I'm not going to support this. Not because I think that it's a foolhardy plan or anything like that, but because what I would prefer to do is actually maintain our financial flexibility as we see what happens with the state. Right? What I would prefer to do, and I do not believe the state is watching and they're going to cut based on what we do here. Okay? I believe we should put more into contingency, right? See what the state's going to do come September. And then in September, whether it's June or September, whenever it gets passed, right? Dole it out based on the priorities. At which point, this board gets a vote on that. Whereas if that's not done at this point, it goes into the budget, either it goes on hold like it did last year, right, and doesn't get spent. Now, if you ask my druthers, I would rather that the amount that you guys need for the trucks get spent as we intended this fiscal year, for exactly the point that you're raising, to keep us somewhat towards the plan, okay? But the reality is, just purely looking at it from a financial perspective, purely not knowing what the state is going to do, I would rather maintain our financial flexibility so that it's in contingency. The state comes and gives us a whack. That's one of the places we can go and say, sadly, you're not going to get this stuff. And we're going to use this to defer some of the expense that we're going to have to absorb, right? And cushion what could be a supplemental tax increase to the rest of the town related to that. Or, if that doesn't come to fruition, the funds are fully funded, and then they could go back into the individual departments based on the priorities at that time. So don't take me not voting against it that I don't love you guys, or that I think that the plan is bad. But I just like the financial flexibility of having it have to come before our board before it gets spent versus putting it somewhere and then just have it be a casualty of a cut or something. I think that's just hiding it, quite frankly. So I'm much better putting it into a larger contingency. And I don't agree that the state's watching that. They're going to say, oh, look, these guys put it all in the contingency. I just don't, that doesn't ring true to me. This is what you do to maintain your flexibility because the state doesn't know what the hell they're going to do. That's just my own board. But, and I appreciate the discussion. I think there's a lot of valid points. It's just I have a different view. It is what it is, whether we put it here or contingency.
How does it maintain more flexibility? Explain that to me.
Because it has to come back before our board. If you put it in here, never has to come before our board. It's gone, it's theirs, they can spend it.
It's either spent on this equipment that needs to be purchased, or we get hit with something, and the first selectman needs to find money.
Or he can
and he would
spend,
he would take it out.
or he can spend it and say, raise the tax rate higher.
Spend what?
Spend the money and say, raise the tax rate higher. Oh, geez, I already ordered the truck, I already did this. This is already gone.
How's the tax rate going to go higher? I don't know.
Because you got to fill the bucket if the state hits us. That's the point. The state comes and hits us in September. We've got three options. Cut spending to the extent that things haven't been spent, hit the surplus, which I think we're loath to do. I think we all agree with that, or do a supplemental tax increase by sending a tax bill to every taxpayer and saying, courtesy of Daniel Malloy, notice I use Daniel, courtesy of Daniel Malloy, here's your tax increase. We're terribly sorry.
Well, it wouldn't be Daniel Malloy at that point. It's going to be the legislature. So
It'll be, but I think we put Daniel
I
Malloy
think he's
on
the
there.
only crazy one. I'm hoping they're not as crazy as he is.
Right.
But
And if they're not, the money's in contingency, so we can move it.
I think
That's
They were-
fine. It's
I just
both
think that
ways are
we-
valid. I just have a different view of where I'd put it, period. I
If for
wouldn't
some
dole it out
reason-
now.
If for some reason the trucks are not purchased this year, in this fiscal year, or...
And we'll
or-
actually
or-
know
Or
that.
in the budget.
And we'll actually know that.
Yep.
We would actually know that. If we put this in contingency, we would actually know how this fiscal year ended up
Yeah.
and what was ordered, so that you could make a decision with better information as to what was ordered and what you really have when you make that decision to take it out of contingency and
Okay, but what I was
September.
trying to finish the sentence on before you jumped in was, if that is to happen, and we don't get one or the other or both or however that is, I suggest that we have these gentlemen back, because we are going to need a new capital plan, one that may involve bonding. I thought a capital plan, in regards to having a capital plan, was to have definitiveness in regards to what we were going to do, not bond the stuff, which if we do not make these 2 years' worth of purchases, we are staring a very large bond in the eye, because we are going to need to play catch-up.
Could be.
Catch-up. We might need to be buying 7 vehicles at the same time, and I don't want to pay interest on that.
At $1.4 million, right?
Yeah.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
At a very low interest rate for 20 years.
Interest is interest. I don't want to pay interest on it. I
Yeah,
don't
but
wanna
at a
bond this
very low
stuff. I
rate.
mean, and this is-
That's fine, I agree with you on that,
The
but I'm
plan-
just
The
saying,
plan was supposed to be set up so that there was definitiveness on it, and that we didn't play games, because what was happening was, boards like ours, or the Board of Selectmen, was putting these trucks in there, and then when it got to the RTM level, people were seeing, they wanted to have tax decreases, so it was the easiest number to go after, because you could go after them at $100,000 and $200,000 at a pop.
the one
And-
thing,
And the things were never purchased for 3 years.
well, that could still happen, but the one thing about that plan is we never voted on that plan. We were presented the plan a number of years ago, and it was a plan that was presented. We never voted on it and said we were going to adopt that plan on a long-term basis. Never voted on it.
Okay.
It was presented, we discussed it, we said thanks for the plan, and we would fund it as we could. So we're not going back on a vote
Right.
that we ever took, which we did take on the golf
I
course.
never knew that. Maybe we should just not, never, none of us should follow it, because we never voted on it.
Oh, I'm not saying that.
You know, but no,
I'm
you
just
are
saying-
kind of saying that by the fact that you're saying we never voted on it. You're bringing up the fact that whether we do have to follow it or not follow it.
I'm just
And-
saying we're not going back on any commitment we ever made.
Well, I thought we made a commitment.
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that we didn't make a commitment.
Yeah.
And,
I apologize to these two guys who put the plan together.
and just one thing, I appreciate a plan, but unfortunately, things change.
Right,
That's the problem. And
right.
thank you both for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I'm going to call this for a vote. What was the number, Jim? What is it exactly? Yeah.
Linda, was I correct? $526,580?
And that, when we did have the second on that, so do we want to add into capital outlay for, please help me out here, guys, 2 dump trucks and the backhoe
Correct.
for $526,580?
$580.
All in favor of adding that? One. All opposed? 1, 2. Oh, did you vote for it? Yes, so 2 in favor, 5 against. Did I count right? 6 against, 1 abstention. Sorry.
621?
6-2-1. Thank you.
No, 261.
261.
Sorry.
Sorry,
I
261.
liked your first number.
The most, yeah, Scott loved that first one.
Making you do automatic.
It's late, Scott. I screwed up. I'm sorry about that. All right. Next item is anything else in Public Works operations? How about, if not, Public Works operations, is that where paving is?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, does anybody have, I know that was a hot topic of discussion, so does anyone want to go to paving? And I'm going to be right back. Mr. Brown, can you take?
Love to. Here we go, paving. Mr. Walsh.
I make a motion to restore $1 million to the paving line.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. We have a second.
Bring it up to what the first selectman's recommendation is and what I thought was a plan, but may never have been a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have a second? Mrs. Merriam seconds it. Open for discussion.
Some of my reasons for putting in there's a couple of reasons. I had the ability, and I really appreciate Mr. Bartlett taking the time out of his busy day. We had about a 45-minute discussion in regards to paving because, you know, my concern was that we seemed to have a plan of approximately $3 million after a lengthy conversation in regards to where paving was and how many miles needed to be done. And you know, I think there might have been some confusion in his testimony the other day because I know some people on at least my side of the aisle talked and thought they heard him say that he was fine with $2 million. In talking to him, and Scotty, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem to suggest that this may be a particularly good year to do the $3 million, to put $3 million in there because you actually have a very good price right now in regards to paving and paving materials and all that other stuff. Can you just kind of, I just want everybody to hear the same thing that I heard and not be your mouthpiece.
Thank you. You are correct, Jim. We do have a favorable year in terms of all our contracts. All our bid numbers are good. We just released what we call the VIP vendor in place. That's for the asphalt component, and that's with O&G. Just met with them. So we do feel we have favorable pricing. I might have confused the boards, but when we had the big daunting task of the $14 million state cut, Joe and I met with Mr. Tetro, and we said that we could do with $2 million, but we obviously asked for $3 million because that's the benchmark that we felt we needed to support our paving plan for this year. So I'm not trying to argue that we couldn't do without the, you know, we could stay afloat at $2 million, but obviously $3 million was the number we requested. We feel that's the benchmark we need to, you know, stay on our plan, to your point. But I think the confusion was that was because of the state cut.
And this favorable pricing you have, is this better pricing that you have right now than you've had in past years?
That is correct. It's the lowest it's been in the last few years, yes.
Last few years? Is there something driving that? That you know of? I don't know whether there's a market condition or whatever.
I honestly think some of the things that might be driving it is there's more competition, not so much in the asphalt industry itself, but in the treatments that we've been accustomed to doing. Okay. Now I think the asphalt community has realized that if communities are going to go over and use these other means of sealing roads, that they have to sharpen their pencil and be more competitive with those treatments.
Okay. And you had mentioned something about that if we don't, there's a possibility that there's a risk if we don't do all the paving, that some of the treatments we've previously done could come up or not be as effective if we don't stay on top of it.
Yeah, that's correct. When you're assessing a road's condition, you're assessing what treatment it can go on it. And I think Mr. DeWitt brought this up when he talked about Rich White's plan and my plan in the past. And it was all about getting the roads paved. But the shift now has been, once we get the roads paved, putting the maintenance dollars into them. And that's where, if you don't put the maintenance dollars back into the new roads, those new roads don't stay good. Instead of repairing a road for $2 or $5 a square yard, you're jumping it back to $8 and $10 a square yard.
Okay. And I just don't want there to be any confusion. Based on your testimony the other night when you were here, were you saying at all or not saying that you could be doing the road repairs now for $2 million per year?
What I was saying was, in lieu of the state cut, we would have to take it on the chin and reduce it to $2 million. But we had our plan well thought out and well planned was a $3 million request. What we do today is we tie it into service miles. So we look at the community and we own 275 miles of road. When you look at the measures of your parking lot, you convert those into miles. That gives us 288 miles. We then look at a treatment. So let's say a chip seal is valued as lasting 5 years. If we propose to do 5 miles of a chip seal, we take that 5 miles accomplished times its 5-year life cycle, and that equals 25 miles back towards the goal of 288 miles. So our goal annually, when we put the plan together, is to put 288 miles of service life back into the network. And history has shown that when you fall below that, you're falling below the curve, and that's where it's going to get more expensive to catch up. If we fund it properly and we hit that mark, and we maintain that level, then we won't be doing the more expensive treatments in years to come. That's how we were able to reduce $348,000 in the request this year.
When you put this number together, put the 3 million, which is a number I've heard before, you've talked to our board before in previous years as being part of the plan. Did you know the favorable pricing? Are you actually going to get more for this year's $3 million than you would because of the favorable pricing that exists in the marketplace right now?
Yeah, we could possibly get a little more done. See, as good as the market is as we speak, the problem in the asphalt industry is, you know, here, let's just, for hypothetical reasons, say it's April. So that's the price today. But as we gear up and do this work in July and August, if there's an escalation, which are in all the bids,
Supply and demand.
then, and essentially, that's a risk. Now, you could lock up early. The vendors could, but they're going to factor in that same risk I'm talking about, so therefore I don't get today's pricing. So I have today's pricing, but you're not going out in April and paving all your roads. So the risk is, we can tell them we're going to commit to 20,000 tons of asphalt, but they're not giving it today's price. They're going to factor in escalation, or we can go month to month, watch the escalation, which is a weekly number, and what we've done in the past is you just dial it back if the number goes up, or you continue to do the work if the price is, you know, affordable.
Okay. I have a couple other comments, but I think at this point, Mr. Chairman, if anybody has any further questions for the DPW staff, I'd let them continue.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else? Mr. DeWitt, and then I'll go to Mrs. Marmion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the member that Mr. Walsh refers to on his side of the aisle that was questioning was me. The specific discussion we had that night, and my questioning, because I was really looking for you to say, Chris, you need $3 million, and this would have been done. But it felt to me there was little hesitation, and there was no mention of a $14 million cut, even though I know it was kind of implied over this whole budget season that we couldn't work with the $2 million. So that's where I am today. The fact that you can get better pricing this year, now knowing the additional information, and I scanned through the documentation, Mr. Michelangelo, and you sent me today, which I appreciate, thank you very much, is even more fodder for me to think that it's at $2 million this year. And again, I would just ask for a new plan going forward from this year, but I cannot support the addition of the $1 million. Please don't tell Rich White.
No, fair enough. As much as you guys might not have discussed it, we had meetings internally with the selectmen, and we cut it from $3 million to $2 million in lieu of the $14 million state cut.
Understand.
Thank
you.
And once again, looking over all line items, there just isn't any discretion in.
I mean, that's the bit, your eye goes to that one first. I'm totally with you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Marmion.
So thanks for the memo you sent us today, kind of outlining the rationale for increasing the budget request. I'm interested in the fact that we are going to have to potentially spend more money in the future years to maintain the roads because they hadn't been paved or maintained to the highest degree. But do you have any, you mentioned, you know, the cost per, I think, square foot of paving, that it goes from 5 to 8, is that what you said? Or something like that. But can you translate that for us into dollar terms of what it might cost the town in terms of an added expense of not maintaining our roads at the $3 million level? Is there a way for you to do that, or give us some perspective on the costs?
The short answer is yes, I can. So again, in that long form that Joe and I sent out, literally the cost values are prioritized the way the list is. So the lowest item is crack sealing, the next item is fog sealing. I can give you square unit costs for all those items, so that you have a better handle. Everything we do is by square yard. But so your question is, like, today, if there's a road that's ready for a chip seal and I can get away with $2 a square yard, if we don't decide to do that, it's going to potentially move to the next level of treatment, which is now $4.75 a square yard. And if we miss that envelope, we might go into like an asphalt leveling course, which is going to be $7 a square yard. And if we miss that, we're going to go into a mill and fill, which is $8.50 a square yard. So you get the sense that as the condition of the road deteriorates, the repair does go up.
Yeah. And one of the most expensive things we do, if we have to go into a road and mill off 2 inches of asphalt and put back in 2 inches of asphalt, that's when we've let a road go quite a bit down that curve. So just in like a number that's easier to translate is like approximately $50 a foot if we had to do that. So if you have 1,000 feet of road, you're spending $50,000. If you have a mile of road, $250,000. And one of the problems is that we can't do our whole network like that. If that was our MO, we could never address our 275 miles of road for $3 million. We'd be behind the 8 ball and we'd sink. So the way to address our roads is through, hitting them at 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. Because if we wait till 15 years and have to pay that $50 a foot, the equation, the house of cards falls apart. It doesn't work that way.
Thanks. I mean, I just think we're setting ourselves up for failure with our paving program if we don't fund it or maintain it at a level that you are advocating for us to do, because we're setting ourselves up for increased expenses next year and the year after that. And that's my major concern with not funding this paving program.
Thank you, Mrs. Marmion. Mr. Brown has a comment.
So Scott and Joe, that night when you presented, you convinced me that you could do more with less based on how the paving process goes on now and the material, right? That's what you said.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. We do more with less.
Okay. So then the $2 million at that time you felt was okay. I understand why you want to put the $1 million in, but that's what you said that night.
I think the part of the missing equation is the meetings that take place before we sat with you, and we were being asked how we could assist the town of Fairfield in its time of need when they're getting cut $14 million. Our plan, I can give you a sheet that actually identifies every road and the treatment and its life expectancy, and the plan ties into the 288 miles that we wish to put back into the network. So yes, you can cut it if you want, but then instead of putting 288 into the network, we'll deduct the $1 million, and that will leave us putting 200 miles back into the network. And if that's what we want to do, okay, but then we go back to her point, which is simply at some point, when we miss the opportunities to do those less expensive treatments, we will play catch-up at more expensive
All right,
treatments.
I get that, but that's not what you said.
But again, I think in fairness, we're excluding the point that we were told to help the town meet a $14 million, potential $14 million shortfall from the town, from the state. So in doing so, we said, well, we'll do $2 million worth of paving.
But all I'm saying is, the night you presented to us, then that's all you had to say.
Fair enough.
And I think we did, so on our menu of different paving, one of the ways, and I'm not sure if we explicitly said it or not, but one of the ways we were going to fit it into $2 million is, order stuff off the cheaper side of the menu and not the steaks and the.
I understand, but unless I misunderstood, okay, I felt that after that presentation, you were okay with that. We didn't talk about this $14 million. And this is, I want to keep up with the program, okay? But now I want to know exactly what you need year after year. And then I would suggest that you say, I don't care what the budget is, I don't care what the state says, say, this is what I need. And I didn't hear that night. And I was surprised about it a little bit. And I felt, okay, found a new method, there's a little innovation, there's new material, there's a new way to pave. So maybe this is a new benchmark. All right, so, I mean, that's just where I'm coming from.
I have to.
thank you.
So I couldn't be here that evening. I had a conflict, and I had actually heard that exact same commentary by several board members up here. So I went back and watched the meeting myself, and that was pretty much the exact same interpretation I came away with, right?
Fair enough.
And it was just, would you get as much? Probably not as much, but you wouldn't lose that entire $1 million because you could do things more efficiently, and that it wouldn't derail the program significantly, right?
Okay.
That's what I took away, and I didn't have the benefit of being able to ask questions, but I took away the exact same thing that Jim just said, Mr. Brown, when I watched it after the fact, just so that I go on the record as well. Does anybody else have any questions, comments on this item?
I have a couple things not directed to them.
Is it for the $1 million? Is it for the, so the motion is before us. I was out of the room.
My motion, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been seconded. Okay, it's been seconded. Okay. To restore the $1 million, right? So you want to make sure
You
you had it right.
seconded it.
So,
Like another
gentlemen,
one.
thank you. I
No,
think.
no, I said just one thing to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, if you guys want to sit down, it doesn't involve really.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Two other reasons, I think, is they've talked about this $3 million before.
Yep.
And we've known that number, and I think, once again, although we might not have an official vote on a plan, it was the plan that they brought to us on what they think we need to have done, and especially once we decided to move paving back into the operational budget fully. And I think that we should support that plan. Lastly, and I might be a broken record on this, it's a similar argument to what I made the last time. It's a way to get more money into this budget. It would be another area where, just like last year, the first selectman's put hold on paving. If he needed money, he would be able to tell them to put another hold on it, because we have other stresses from the state government, and not have that money exposed out there if one was inclined to do so in a contingency account that would seem extremely large. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, for those comments. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor of increasing the paving line item in the Public Works operations budget by $1 million? All in favor? Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opposed, 3, 4, 1 abstention. So the motion fails. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so we're still in Public Works.
351?
351. We're still in Public Works operations. Anybody? Anybody? Okay.
Yeah, I do want to just make a
One.
comment in regards to, with the stresses once again. And I guess I'll ask Public Works to address this more during the year, but I had some questions in regards to your staffing and in regards to the fact that you seem to be supervisor heavy. And as we go forward, if we get hit by the state both this year and next, or it seems like we're going to be getting hit with another year, I think you guys are going to have to look at staffing on the supervisory level. Because it seems to be that we have a lot of supervisors for not, a lot of chiefs for not that many Indians. So I think that's going to be an area that you guys are going to have to take a look at next year if we have these cuts by the state.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments on Public Works operations? Seeing none, let's go to the Building Department. Anything in the Building Department? Anybody in the Building Department? Okay. None. We're going to go to Engineering. Anything in Engineering? Anything in Engineering? Seeing none. I think that's it with Public Works. Gentlemen, I want to thank you from Public Works for coming out tonight. We know you guys do a very hard job for the town. We appreciate the efforts. Please understand that we're just dealing with significant budgetary pressures, and it's no reflection on our thoughts on you as a department or your value to the town. It's the times in which we live in at the present point in time. I will tell you, I will keep to my word as before, and I will look to add money into contingency so that it's available should we have circumstance in September to be able to utilize that money for this as well as for other departments. And that's just a personal comment from myself. But in terms of the vote of the board, I just want you to know how we're all feeling tonight. Thank you. Let's
And
go.
if a plow breaks down next winter, Mr. Flynn is a great shovel. He can use a shovel really well.
It's all actually outsourced, so both by you guys as well as me.
I know my street's going to get swept.
Yeah.
You did it last year, I'm okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Scott only works Thursday nights. Boom, boom. All right. All right. We're going to go to the Health Department. And we're going to go to Health and Human Services. We're on page 263. Health Department. Is there anything for the Health Department? Seeing none. We'll go to Human and Social Services. Anything on Human and Social Services? I see no hands on Human and Social Services. Solid Waste and Recycling. Anything on Solid Waste and Recycling? See none. All right. Now we're going into Culture and Recreation. Library, main branch of the library. We are in the library. That is page 279. Do I have anything on the library? Mr. Mottola.
So when we look at this, we're doing library main branch and then Fairfield Woods, correct? So two
Correct.
separate. So I'm going to make a motion for the library main branch to add to the library materials line $100,000. I think that the library.
Do we have a second for that?
Yeah, I'm
first of all?
sorry, second for that, please.
Second is Mrs. Marmee.
And, I'm going to pitch for this motion, and if it's not successful, I'm hoping that, some of this goes into the contingency fund. My concern is that the library has taken somewhat of a hit over the last couple of years. And the comment Jim said just about an hour and a half ago, where he said something to the effect, if you take stuff out of the budget and expect to get it back next year, you're kind of dreaming. And my concern here for the library is that they took a good hit. Some of it was restored by the Board of Selectmen. It was, the amount restored was only to keep the hours open. So that's the reason why I'm making the motion under the library materials line for the main branch to add $100,000 to.
Could somebody
that
turn off
budget.
their dinger?
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Oh, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
You said 100,000?
100.
And that was seconded by Mrs. Marmee, and this is just for the library main branch. Let's make sure. So the other night at the Board of Selectmen, they restored money to the library. It's purely on the personnel side to keep the branches, to keep it open,
To keep Sundays open.
to keep Sundays open, correct?
At both libraries.
At both libraries.
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
That's 103,815, I think it was, restored.
Yeah. Okay, so they did have something restored from that original reduction here. I just want to make sure we were all on the same page. Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments as regards the materials here?
So, just for clarity, the money you're looking to restore was from the original First Selectmen's cut? That was not a cut that the Board of
Right.
Selectmen made 2 days ago?
That's right, the original.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Because I was going to say, because I don't see a reduction here in this list, so.
Yes, Mrs. Marmee, please.
So I support this motion. We've had a lot of discussion today, where's the plan? We should stay on the plan. Well, the library has a plan, and part of that plan is for materials. And as I mentioned before, materials, that's why at our main library and our branch library, many of us go to the library to borrow materials, and we want current materials. And our librarians have put forth a plan that's smart and strategic in terms of giving the people in this town the materials that they are looking for. I just think that if we want to stay on that plan, and if we want to give the citizens in this town what they need and want, this is the way to do it. I also am very concerned because, as was mentioned at the Board of Selectmen meeting and again tonight, if we lose this opportunity to bring the library to where they need to be in terms of materials, we may never get back. We're so off the plan anyway in terms of how we funded materials in the past, that next year it's going to be even more difficult to recover that, we've been talking about this cliff. So I really strongly support restoring that library materials budget.
Thank you, and that's, thank you. And what was please give me the amount of that, John, that you asked for, it was $100,000? $100,000. Okay, so it wasn't a full restoration, it was $100,000, is that correct? Correct. Okay. Anybody else have a comment on this? Mr. Walsh?
And I understand your points, and I'm really not against it, but based on where this board discussion has gone, at least the majority of this board and the last couple of things, it sounds like this is all going to be a fight in regards to contingency money when we get to contingency, and then how this board's going to fight that out later on about what our priorities are going to be, I guess, after the state makes their decision. So I'm not against it, but I can't say that I can support it other than saying that I'm planning on putting, I guess, since I have no other vehicle to do it, put money into the budget so it's there, because all of my options, including maybe this one, are going down the drain. So the only way to do it is with this contingency account, and then have it come back to this board and us have to handle, what the priorities are, whether some goes to trucks, whether some goes to paving, whether some goes to the library. So I guess I'm going to say, if we're going to do all those other things, and we're talking about plans, and I understand there is a plan, and Ms. Ronald has a plan on what she's purchasing, so I'm not against the plan. But if you look at what happened last year when the state cut us $1 million, and what the first selectman's priorities were, of how he was going to pay for that, he put holds on paving, trucks, library materials, and a few others. And I guess this is going to have to flow into this plan. And let's hope the state doesn't find out we have this pool
Let
of
me
money.
ask you a question. What did he, what was cut this year from materials or the library? We got people from the library here. Okay, so that was cut, I'm sorry, I don't mean not in this current budget, this current year.
17.
100,000? Okay, let me ask you a question. Was that in materials? That was specifically in materials this year, was 100,000?
It's one of the items it makes up the 900,000.
Okay, so, but it is one of the items was they cut $100,000 in materials this year. Okay. Mr. DeWitt.
I think we need to be honest. Material, the library material line item is the paving of library. It's the biggest single line item. As Mr. Mayor.
Other than salary?
Other than salary, right, which, we're not going to control. Mr. Mayor just said, we're already got a $100,000 hold on it, and I agree with Mr. Walsh. I think maybe it's time to start. We might not get this back, I agree, but I think maybe it's time to start thinking about this 304,000 being the right number rather than not the number we're going to recover to next year.
So I want to opine on this. Right now, this is cut 179,000, or 37%, right? You're asking for 100,000, which still means it would be cut $79,000, or 17% even after your cut.
Wasn't asking for the entire amount.
No, I understand. And this is after there's a hold this past year. Mr. Walsh, I hear what you're saying. Given what was cut this past year, which was about 20%, right? Because it's 483 hasn't been spent. I could support 100,000 here, to be honest, in this area.
I don't see how you can support it if the last number of budgets, we put it all into contingency. You can't have it both ways. You either got to go with the plan, and these plans have gone with paving and capital
There
plans.
wasn't a plan here.
And there's no plan for anything. We don't.
Well,
no
actually,
plan.
there was a plan. There was a plan.
We have no plans. But regardless, we've gone in the same direction. I don't understand why we would go in a different direction here. Why don't we wait? Put the money into contingency. Even maybe it's the whole amount, because I think we should also see what's left at the end of this year and how much. Maybe they'll get the full. I'm hoping they get the full $100,000 this year.
I don't think they're going to. That's why I'm saying it.
Well, I don't know. Mr. Mayor says we where we're going is we don't know where that plan's going, and we might end up the year and make up all that money.
What do you
we
think,
could.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, what I said was that there's about 900,000 on hold, and the last look, there is a potential of 600,000 available. So,
Quarter left.
pardon?
We have a quarter left.
Right, and that number will be updated, I mean,
Few
we'll know more in a month, but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but it's, and I think the material took a hit the year before that, too, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually like Mr. DeWitt's metaphor there,
That it's the
the
paving.
paving of the library.
I try my best.
It's good.
It's a pretty good line.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have a thought on here? I mean, it's a valid point. It's a valid discussion. These are tough decisions. This number is not as big as the other numbers.
Oh, sorry about that. And the only other concern I have, and I'm going to raise, is contingency. I mean, there's a risk with contingency.
What's the risk?
Well, contingency has been cut, when was it? 4,
Oh,
5 years
by the
ago by the
RTM.
RTM. So,
Quite frankly, this could all be cut.
right, so I'm just nervous about us looking at contingency will be sitting there, and then we'll have an opportunity to say, prioritize where we restore funds, because we may not have that option, so that makes me nervous.
I think that's valid, but I would say that that's going to be a risk regardless of where we put it.
Agree.
In all fairness, I mean, it's just going to be a risk.
And in all fairness, all these things should be put in the same pot, and if contingency survives, then this board should prioritize it after we know what the state numbers are, after we see how much everybody
Yep.
got out of this thing, and this shouldn't be any different from everything else.
Yeah, I want to go on record as saying I agree, and one of the priorities, once we get contingency straightened out, assuming we have money left over, would be to restore it to the library. So I don't disagree whatsoever. I would like to see something restored here, given how many years we've whittled this down. But putting it there and waiting to see how the state sorts itself out might be the exact right option here. That's what I argued before on bigger numbers. I just want to go on record that I understand, the materials is a continual hit here. Paving, as it were. Mrs. Leclerc?
Oh, I just wanted to say, well, we did help Department of Public Works a bit by adding the street sweeper back. So what I'm struggling with is 100,000 is more than I was considering.
What were you
so
thinking, Mrs. Leclerc?
I don't know.
And don't forget that there's a line item for the
75,000.
branch library as well, where the materials were cut, so that should, I think,
Yeah, that's about
potentially weigh in,
$16,000.
and they are the busiest branch library in the state of Connecticut from a lending standpoint, so I think we should consider that as well.
Thank you. That's about $16,000. We can take a look at that when it's there. So any other thoughts, comments, concerns on this item? Okay. All in favor of adding the $100,000 back? 1, 2, 3 opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that motion fails to add it back, and we'll have that discussion when it's in contingency, I'm sure. Anything else on the library main? All right, let's go to Library Fairfield Woods. Thoughts on this? Go ahead.
Well, it's a total of $16,000, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to make a motion to restore $16,000 to the materials budget for Fairfield Woods Branch Library.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that? Mr. Mottola seconds that. Any discussion on that? The same discussion we just had, really?
And it's the same, but it's different because it is the busiest branch library. The amount, perhaps people would be more comfortable with as $16,000, and I think it would go a long way in terms of giving people what they need when they come into the library to borrow books or digital materials.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Marmion. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this line item? Seeing none, all in favor of restoring the $16,000? We have 3. All opposed? We have 6. That item fails on that one. Anything else related to Fairfield Woods and the main public library? Nothing on that score. Okay, we are done with the libraries for this evening. Thank you. All right, we're going to go on to Penfield Pavilion Complex. Any other questions, comments, concerns on Penfield? Thank you, everyone. All right, Penfield. Anybody on Penfield? They raised the revenue from Penfield, I saw, because they raised the rates, correct? Okay. Anything else on Penfield? Seeing none, we'll go to Park and Recreation. Park and Recreation, anything on Park and Recreation? Yes. Okay, Mr. Walsh.
Well, we received a communication, I think, from our HR director stating that Mr. Calabrese, congratulations, received the official spot to be the director, correct?
Is that a correct statement?
That's a correct statement.
Okay. So, based on that, I just made an inquiry about salary levels, because there's a salary level in here that was based basically on the last recreation director. So it's down for fiscal 18 for 134,866. And I inquired about the salary level, and I was told it was approximately 115. Am I incorrect?
Correct.
So my thought is I would like to reduce that line, since we now have a new director, we know what the salary level is, and reduce that line, the 134,866, by $16,417, which would then make that line. Linda, did I do that math correct? Maybe I did. No, I picked the wrong line. I was looking at the fiscal year budget for 17 by mistake.
Okay,
So-
I get a difference of 19,866.
That's right.
19,866. So that would be my reduction there, and then a further reduction in the Social Security to be commensurate with that.
Do we have a second for the motion, and Linda can work on the number, and then Mr. DeWitt has seconded that. But wait a minute, on the Social Security, what's the,
765, it's 119 is the limit.
that's what I thought.
We're good.
So we're good, so there's no
There's no threshold.
119's the limit, right?
Yep.
And this is 115 is the job?
Yep.
So that they don't age out of Social Security, or they don't,
There's a little savings, right?
no, shouldn't be.
It's not worth,
Between 119 and
Huh?
115.
It's not worth multiplying.
I'm going to do
It's
it.
$4,000
Yes.
an
Yes.
hour.
$4,000 I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible.
Not even.
It's de minimis. All right.
Can round it up to 20.
Well, no, you don't save it. That's the
Exactly.
point.
Between 115 and 119.
Call it
you don't
20
say?
grand.
Because the limit's 119, so they pay up to 119 and then they stop. So, well, I guess you get a little bit.
There's a 4,000.
519.
1519, okay.
Well,
So it's plus the 1519. What's the total, Linda?
It's 21,385.
So a reduction of 21,385. Do we have a second for that? Did I get that already?
you did recognize.
Mr.
the
DeWitt.
answer, you did.
Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns on this reduction? Seeing none, to reduce the salary and related Social Security commensurate with it for the director's position by 21,385. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That line item carries.
And I'd like to congratulate Mr. Calabrese as well.
Congratulations, Mr. Calabrese. All right, let's go into this. I think there was another item here. There was a reduction by the Board of Selectmen in this area, correct? Chris, go right ahead. Mr. DeWitt, did you have this?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You had mentioned it earlier.
Yes. Let me get back where I was here. Sorry. Taking a lot of notes tonight. The Board of Selectmen reduced, let me see here, regular pay of $67,816, which I believe is one recreation direct, no. Shoot, Parks and Rec Director. Plus $5,188, to which I get a total of $73,004 salary and Social Security. I would like to reinstate that money to the budget, and I have three very specific reasons. One, as we just heard, we have a brand-new department head. I'd hate to see him short one person, I should say, sorry, going into his new role. Two, this is a large revenue-generating department. Well, it's a large revenue, I don't know what else to say on that particular point. And third, even though, I'm going to say, we've added Penfield Pavilion back to the mix, I'm sure that's no small task to manage, and I think that's going to take up our new department head's time. And So for those reasons, I'd like to reinstate and just make sure I'm on the right number, Linda. $73,004. I'd like to
What was the-
reinstate the position that was removed by the Board of Selectmen, and I believe the total number is $73,004. That number again?
Yeah, just a clarification, what we were doing here is, the 1,500 that was quoted earlier is not right, because that was on the whole difference between the 115 and the 135. You only take it on the difference between the 115 and the 119.
That's why I thought it was a little bit high.
So the actual number is $344.
Right.
How much?
$344 for the
Does
Social
anybody have a
Security.
problem with it being 344 versus?
Can I make a motion to amend it?
Yeah, let's amend the Social Security.
So what's the new
first.
number?
Okay.
Well, hang on, we already got another motion on the table. Let's go through this.
Yeah, right.
Can we have the second for that? You were in the middle. You have a second, Mr. Mottola, to reinstate this. So the number's 73004, and that's to reinstate the position within Parks and Recreation. We have a second, so that motion's before us. Mrs. Marmion?
I agree with what Chris DeWitt had said, but I want to add to it, which is that we had also asked for a waterfront development plan from Parks and Rec, and I think that, again, to build on the revenue, we're looking for more revenue. So to develop that plan and to implement it, it's going to take time and energy to be successful and hopefully add more revenue to the town. But in addition, I think we have to look at the services that this person who had been cut by the Board of Selectmen provides, and they provide tremendous service to the youth and parents, et cetera, in this town. And I think we really risk damaging the delivery of those services. So it's the service, it's the revenue. And I also believe that this department has a retirement that's coming up in January of this year, or some
Mr.
October.
Calabrese, why don't you come forward?
I'm sorry, October of this year, so that this department would be down not only the coordinator, assistant coordinator position, but then also down the person who's retiring. So that would be a lot of stress for this department, and I just don't think it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
So, Mr. Calabrese, I just want to be sure, the position that was cut by the Board of Selectmen was basically your own position,
That's correct.
correct?
Correct.
You can't do both positions at the same time for the same
I
price?
would prefer not to.
Hey, it's lucky you got promoted.
All right, which I understand, but then there's this other position, I hope that this retirement is on the records, or at least somewhat official, or
It's not official at all.
it's not official at all?
It's
Okay.
not. She's been with us 39 and a half years, almost 40 years.
Okay.
It's fairly safe to say she's going to go, but again, I wouldn't like to really go on the record saying, hey, you need to be out.
Okay.
We want her to
Oh.
stay as long as possible.
Okay. But it may happen in October, may
Correct.
not? Okay. Correct. And I had actually looked at, not knowing whether it was official or not official, so I didn't really want to, I don't want to retire somebody who doesn't want to retire.
Right.
And I know the person, I think they do a great job in your department. So
Thank you.
that, I just want to put that on the record. But I thought about, if she retired, you need to look at, and I've decided not to do anything for this year, but I think you're going to have to look at, if that retirement were to come to pass, whether during this year, after you get more accustomed into your new role and you have more time to do that, whether that position and those responsibilities from that position could be rolled into other people's positions, so that if we have a difficult year, when we come back here next year, you will have had time and then could address that with us.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I know the person, I know the role, I think they do a great job, but I think we're all departments are going to have to do that, but you have something coming up.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to shortchange you on where this is going or whatever. And clearly, if people's roles change and take on extra things, we might need to spread a little bit of funds out to change their job description. But I think it's going to have to all be on the table, and I'm confident that you'll be able to do that. So I don't want to change that role right now, but I just want to put it on the table that we're all kind of looking at that, because we, you know.
I can assure you that's my plan, is to look at all the positions
Yes.
and exactly evaluate the entire office.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Calabrese, anybody else? Mr. Marmon, did you have anything else? No. Anybody else? Okay, so the item before us is to add, could you give me the number real quick? 74? 73004 back to the budget to fund this position that was taken out earlier this week. That item is before us. All in favor? Opposed? Abstention? That item carries 8-1.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
Linda said something?
go ahead.
Yeah, so then the number on
To
your
revise
number.
the other number?
Yeah,
Yeah,
revise
when-
the
Make a
Social
motion.
Security component.
Right.
I'd like to make a motion to revise my previous motion, and just give me the number, to be a reduction. of the new hire.
566 when you add both Social Security and Medicare.
How much is it?
566.
Right. When you add both Medicare and, there's a savings on Medicare from the
Right.
135 all the way down.
So it's 21,566?
No,
Or
566.
for just the
500
Social
and-
Security portion?
Social Security and Medicare.
566.
Just the benefits portion.
Okay. What was the total now of the salary portion plus the 566? 20,432.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, so the revision of the prior amendment is 20,432. Do we have a second to Mr. Walsh's, Mr. DeWitt? Okay.
Before we go forward, if you could just tell me the amount of now the last motion, adding the position back, all in, the one motion we just made and passed.
You just added 73,004.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So this motion is now before us as amended. All in favor of this amended motion? Opposed, abstentions, that line item carries. So both, we're now clear of any motions, and we have the right numbers in there. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we'll go to the waterfront and marina. Anything on the waterfront or marina? Seeing none, we'll go to the Carl Dickman Golf Course. Anything on the Dickman Golf Course? Seeing none, we'll go to Smith Richardson. Anything on Smith Richardson? Seeing none, we are done with,
Can I just make one comment about, it's not, I'm not going to add anything, it's not a motion, but if we're looking at the contingency later on, I would like that we at least look at that lawnmower that Mike cut out
okay?
as part of
What's the
that
number on
list
that?
of stuff.
$60,000.
It was 60,000. I'd like that to
Got it.
at least be an item that gets prioritized and we look at again.
Sure.
As part of the contingency conversation,
Absolutely.
only because it's a significant piece of equipment, and I don't want to keep repairing the same thing and spend $15,000 repairing this other mower.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to make sure we just bring it up here, because it's a topic. It was $9,194,000, which is the teacher's retirement contribution. We all know that's been pulled out. We know that we don't know what the state is going to do with that. We know that the speaker is kind of amended an earlier public statement he made where he said he wasn't going to support that, or nobody was going to support that, and now he's saying maybe somebody will support it, or maybe we'll do a portion of it and roll it in. So I just want to make that comment. I don't know that anybody has anything they want to add to that. Seeing none,
Can I
let's,
ask one question in regards to retiree benefits?
well, we were going to go right to
Okay, good,
retiree
okay.
benefits, so your question is timely. So there was an adjustment here, so let's take care of the adjustment,
Okay.
and then we'll have any topic. Go ahead.
Okay, retirees benefit,
Yeah.
object 52105. The OPEB for town retirees increased by $9,275.
Okay? Ne-
Again, in this, do you want to take them together?
Yes, I do.
Retirees benefit, object 52110. OPEB for police and fire reduced by 10,000.
I'm going to make that motion that we increase the OPEB for the town retirees by $9,275, and that we decrease the police and fire by $10,000. Is that the correct motion? Do I have a second for that? Mr. Mottola, thank you. And any discussion on that? That's just better available information. The net effect is negligible, but it needs to be done, correct?
Yes, and you'll have a small adjustment in water pollution control as well.
Yeah. Anybody have any comments on that? Okay, so let's get this out of the way. All in favor? That adjustment? Any opposed? Okay, we just saved $625.
All right. Let her be known that that was my contribution. That was my motion.
Good job.
All right, so go ahead. Mr. Walsh.
My question has to do, and tell me if there's any others that this would apply to, but the new tax collector, he does not qualify for a pension, he gets a 401A. Does his hire change any of the numbers for life insurance or any retirement contribution amounts that are here listed, or has that all been taken into account?
All been taken into account.
Okay.
Like his salary and
Yeah.
Social Security was
Yeah.
adjusted.
Yeah, and I know Mr. Calabrese, who was also just hired,
Right.
he's already in the pension plan, right?
Right.
So does that change anything, or no? No, okay. So we're fine there? Is there any other employees that we need to know of that weren't accounted for in here, that were new hires that are either 401A versus pension versus anything else that we need to account for in here?
No, the Board of Selectmen made an adjustment for the 401A and water pollution control. That's the only place where we were slightly understated.
Okay.
That's been taken care of, so no, we're good.
Okay, my last question, I guess, in this area is now that we've added this position back to Anthony's department, the Parks and Rec department, was anything taken out of here that we need to put back in?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions on retiree benefits or any of that? No questions on retiree benefits? Let's go to debt service. Anything on debt service? Questions, comments, debt service? All right. I'm going to move then. Let's go to contingency, and out of contingency, we'll do a calculation on contribution to surplus. Here, let me kick it off, and then I'll turn it over for further discussion. First of all, I want to thank everybody for the quality of the debate tonight. I know there were some department heads that were disappointed with some of our decisions. I think what we were trying to message is that we support a lot of their plans, whether we formally supported them or not, but that we need a lot of financial flexibility right now because we don't know what the state is going to do. And that's been thrown into even more turmoil, as we mentioned a couple times tonight, by comments that came after the Board of Selectmen voted by the Speaker of the House, who now seems to be opening the door that the legislature is open to this whole concept of passing pension costs down to the towns. Now, he couched that by saying we would roll it in and not do it all in one time. So in other words, hey, it was egregious to come at us for the $9 million in total, but we might come after you for something, right? And then increase it over time, which, by the way, I think is a disaster. I think it's an absolute disaster, and it sets up our earlier conversation from very early in this meeting. The second thing, and Mr. Walsh brought this very clearly, is there's no guarantee on the ECS money. So we're rolling the dice here even on that money. So I think we all have to realize that there's that exposure that we talked about earlier. Now, we all have things. Mr. Walsh spoke very eloquently about DPW and some of the projects there, and I don't agree with his sentiments, but I think it's tough to do. Mrs. Marmion spoke eloquently, as did Mr. Mottola, about the library and the $100,000 there. And I think that's a priority for many of us on this board, myself included. But I don't think it would be fair to commit to the individual department heads that we can give them that money right now, because we don't know whether that money is going to be available. So the thought that's been kicked around is add some money to contingency while trying to keep the tax rate down so that we have that money available. So, A, if the state goes away and we're funded, we can then use that money to fund some of these projects I think that we all believe need to be funded. The library, some paving, some addition to vehicles, whatever else. Or if the town does get hit by an economic whack from the state, once their budget is approved, this contingency money can be used or tapped upon for that uncertainty, as well as, like we talked about, further expense reductions, utilization of surplus maybe, or supplemental tax increase, complements of
the state legislature and the governor. So the question I have, or the dialogue I want to open is, what do we feel comfortable putting into contingency to help us cushion against those potential eventualities? And I wanted to know what the calculation is. We didn't vote on debt service. We'll vote on that as part of the entire budget as a whole. Thank you for that, though. I wanted to know what was the flavor of this board for this discussion. Mr. Walsh?
Can we first get a calculation of where we stand with the changes we've already made this evening? I thought I had, maybe I'm wrong, well, that includes the adding additional revenue of 100,000, and then all the other changes after that to the expense side. I thought the total net was that we've increased spending by 65,797, or I might have missed one.
I have 64,447.
Okay, I'll go with your number.
47.
Right, which gives us, thank you very much. Give us, if at that level, right, that's an addition to spending? Right, so the tax rate remains largely unchanged at 1.3?
Yes.
Okay. Give us the different levels of spending that increase that tax rate, if you wouldn't mind. So what I mean is, if we go to 1.4, how much additional is that? If we go to 1.5, we go to 1.6, we go to 1.7, we go to 1.8.
Well, we've got 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, and 2 prepared.
Okay, so what do you have?
I'd asked them the same question, so I actually
Yeah.
had something prepared.
We all asked them.
Yeah, everybody's asking.
So,
To get to to have a tax increase of 1.7%, a mill rate increase, not a budget increase.
Right.
But a mill rate increase, the total would be, to increase the budget, would be $989,170.
that's not what it says here.
Plus
Oh,
plus you'd have an increase, that would require an increase in the contribution of surplus
I wanted the breakdown to include the
of
surplus.
97,000.
That'd be another motion.
Yeah, well, we could do it all in one motion, doesn't matter, if we wanted to do it. Okay,
Yeah.
so,
So for a total of 1,087,000.
Got it. Okay, I
Minus the
understand it. That's what I was
65 where
looking
you
at.
are.
right. So let me ask you a question then. So if we were to go to 1.8, right, that would say we got 1.4 million, right? Minus the 65, right? We could actually add grand total, let's say 1.3 million in, and be at a tax rate increase of about 1.8%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we could put 1.3 million, just hear me out here, into contingency plus surplus. Now, the surplus would be about 100,000 of that, rough number, correct?
125.
Well, fine.
Yeah.
No, that's if you went to the 1.4. I'm saying it'd be a
Oh,
little
right.
bit less, fine.
Right.
Right, so it'd be 1.3 million less 120, let's say, right, would bring us to 1,180,000 that we could add into contingency. That would give us a tax increase of 1.8%, right, on the mill rate, sorry, right? And it would give us roughly 1.2 million in contingency that, A, could be used for the uncertainty, or B, could be utilized later on, coming to this board, for the library, for certain vehicles, for paving, and for other items, depending on what. The mower, thank you, the mower, right? I just throw that out there that's the math, right? So, does it get us all of paving? No. Does it get us all of vehicles? No. Does it get us all the library? It gets us 100,000, right? And it probably gets you your mower.
Get you a truck.
Right, or two.
And half a road.
Better than what we got, right? And
Yeah.
what's everybody's thought? I'm throwing it out there for discussion.
The 1.3 million change would be a 1,181,000.
Wait, what are you saying? 3 million?
The 1,300,000 change would make available for spending, excluding the required contribution of surplus, $1,181,700.
So I came up with 1,180,000.
Right.
So we're right there.
Exactly.
And we would increase the contribution to the surplus by
Correct.
that amount, right?
Yes, sir.
What do people think? And would that's not taking out, is that factoring in the 65 goes?
No, I didn't.
You didn't, so we got to take out the 65.
Out of the 1,180,000.
Right.
It's in the noise at that point.
No, it's actually out, to be honest. It's got to be out,
It's got to be out.
because it's
I mean-
1,400,000.
Right.
It's 1,413,000, less the 65, right?
Is that what you want to do?
Yeah,
Okay, then let me do that.
1.3.
right? That comes to, I'm just doing math, right? I'm
Right.
not,
Arithmetic.
You do
Right.
arithmetic.
right, probably not math, arithmetic. I'm not doing it real well either. But if you can work on those numbers,
What would you like the total to be, including the 65? 1,413?
I'm just saying,
You want the 1.8 number?
yes.
Gotcha, all right, gotcha.
And it's for discussion purposes.
Right, I understand.
Go ahead, Mr. DeWitt.
I'll start the conversation. In general terms, I like the way that this lays out. We can tick and tie back to the budget, the Board of Selectmen changes, everything kind of falls out. And that 1.3 number was kind of where I was at, actually a little higher than what I was thinking, but I think that's the right number. And I'm okay with 1.8%, frankly,
Okay.
tax increase.
Mr. Mottola?
I mean, I would prefer to go a little higher, but I'm fine with the number also. Just as long, and I think we're all saying it, that if the state doesn't whack us, there is a commitment from this board that we're going to, for lack of a better term, dole some of this money out to those departments, the library, the public works, and the and paving and the lawnmower. Just, I think we do have that commitment, but I just want to make that clear. That's all.
Thank you. Mrs. Marmion, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we've all pretty much committed by the conversation here that we've had tonight that we would look at where we are with the state and go back and hopefully fund some of these departments. I would see us going to 1.9 only because I think it gives us a cushion, and I'm looking at what the RTM might do. And so I would feel comfortable going to 1.9.
Thank you, Mrs. Marmion. Mr. Hopkins, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I guess, what Ms. Marmion was saying. I could see us going to 1.9. I think we need that cushion. We need to put some of these things back in, as we were talking about earlier this evening, in order to continue to invest in our town. And the 1.9, if you look at that tax increase historically, is not that bad compared to where we've been previous years. I mean, previous years, we've had well over 2%. Back in 2010, we were over 6%. I think given the severity of what we're going through with the state reducing our revenue, keeping it to 1.9 would still be a good figure for us to be able to put out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh?
I'm for actually even maybe slightly higher than 1.9, but just slightly under 2, because that would get us closer to having close to $2 million in there. And it would allow us, I mean, even with those numbers, almost fully fund the trucks and the paving. I'm not saying that the library doesn't deserve the money. I'm just saying, putting that as an example. It would allow us to fund many more of our initiatives that I think some of us are behind. Not having this and staying at the 1.3 puts us in a precarious position, and I think we need these funds in there. It wasn't as you know, my preference to put it into contingency. But now that we're here and it's the only vehicle I have to do that, I was kind of siding a little bit on the higher side, higher than 1.8.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Brown?
I'm comfortable with the 1.8. The only thing, and we've talked about it, but I'll just add my 2 cents into this topic, is I look forward to the day where we're not talking about reduction in services or tax increases. Because I know in my business, that's not what we talk about. We don't say if we don't raise our price, we're going to lose customers or vice versa. What we do is we figure out a better way. And it's time for the state and this town to do so. So I look forward over the conversation over the next year on the restructuring, what innovative ways, something that's different, so we can change the conversation that we have every budget season. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Leclerc?
I think I'm okay with the 1.8. I think I'm pretty comfortable with that number. Open to discussion, I guess, but that looks very reasonable to me.
Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc. Mr. DeWitt?
I'll just reiterate, I like the 1.8, I like the visual of the 1.8. I'm also, is Ms. Marmion worried about the RTM to a certain degree. I feel like being under 2% is a better visual than being at 2%, and maybe we can have a conversation with our RTM colleagues and convince them that that's the right number at 1.8, frankly.
Mr. Becker?
Yeah, similar to how I felt last year in the overall budget, I'm not going to do anything with this line. I was happy with the 1.3. I actually believe that it's been years that we have been sending the message to make adjustments between the Board of Ed and the town, and consistently giving room to, quite frankly, particularly on the town side, but consistently giving them room. It isn't buying them time to then come back with something better. I feel like we've done that. We've done that multiple times. So for me, I'm not going to say I'm entirely comfortable with it, but we do have contingency in there, and I think I'm gonna personally just leave it where it is. Clearly, the board is going to be making the adjustments, and I think that people need they need relief in that we are going to probably be getting tolls and sales tax increases and income tax increases, and all of that is probably going to get piled onto us on top of everything else.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Mr. Becker, without having made a reduction to the Board of Education budget, one of the things you say that you've been asking them to do, but you didn't make a cut, and with you wanting to maintain a 1.3% increase, how do you expect to handle if we get hit with like a $2 or $3 million number? What's going to be your solution? Because you seem to have one, I just don't see it. So maybe you can educate my ignorance.
Well,
How are you
Mr.
gonna do
Walsh,
that?
in some instances you've advocated going up. In some instances you've advocated going down. I've
They've
seen you want to
advocated
put
the whole
stuff.
night going up.
I've seen you wanted to go into buying the equipment, and some
You wanna buy the equipment.
possibilities on the contingency. I do believe we are under a microscope, and I do think that I actually differ from the chair on the perspective that I actually think that they are watching. And they're paying very close attention to the quote-unquote rich towns, whether we are or aren't one of those. But I think that they're absolutely watching. So particularly a large amount into contingency versus even maybe just bumping in a smaller amount is probably going to come under a microscope
By who?
more greatly. I think by the state. I think that they're not watching 169 municipalities. They're watching a handful of them.
I think they're
and
going to do what they're
tracking
going to
them.
do. I mean, I understand your position regarding, by the way, I understand and respect your position regarding not want to raise anything, so don't get me the wrong way. I don't think what we do, the state's got such severe issues, they're just looking anywhere. And $1 million in contingency in Fairfield isn't going to change what their overall tax policy is going to be related to Fairfield County. I'm sorry, it's just not, right? They're just going to.
It's a blip.
It's not even a blip.
Yeah, right.
And I hope so.
Right.
And
No,
I respect your opinion. And I hope you're right on that one because, you just, we don't want We don't want them looking at
It's-
what we're
it's-
doing. But, and I had, I'd advocate, look, I mean, I think the Board of Ed ultimately, one of the things that we didn't do tonight was add beyond that 2 million. I actually think the Board of Ed is going to take the brunt of it. I think that they are going to come down, and even with some of the adjustmts to the formulas, they're still going to end up with probably several $1 million in reductions. I think that there are a number, you talk about the...
State, you mean?
I think from the state. I think that there's a component, I want to say it was from DDS, there was going to be a potential another $1 million, and if you look at what's been going on and at the state level, and you look what's been going on within all their departments, particularly that department, they're not getting the money from anywhere else. They are going to probably turn to the BOE. So I think the Board of Ed, to some extent, is getting a several $1 million reduction this time around. And I think if that wasn't the case, maybe we could talk on, the fact that the restoration of the 2 million, but they're going to take potentially the brunt of it as well. I also advocated, I want to say I said this at the Saturday session, but I think that if they're going to come to us for the pension item in any capacity, that it's the town's, I think, quite frankly, obligation to the taxpayers to band together with other municipalities and go to court with this and to challenge it. There are a number of things that have already been brought up as to legal questions as to whether they can do it. And you know what, if they want to go somewhere else with what they're going to take from us instead, let them try to do it, but they're running out of other places, which is why they're going to the pension item.
I don't disagree with you about the banding together and fighting that legally. I really do. I think that's absolutely accurate on that score. Mr. Walsh, I didn't mean to interrupt. You
Yeah,
had
no,
asked a
I just think
specific
that
question.
without putting any money in here, it's a fool's game to not try to protect the town in some way, because there will be no way to protect the town. I mean, unless you have a supplemental tax bill. There will be no way to do it. And I think it's a fool's game to not try to protect something. It's why we have contingency accounts. I wanted to do it other ways so it wouldn't be as transparent as that, but here I am. And I did try to raise other things, because I wanted to be able to set the agenda of what that spending is, and if we had to cut back on that, well, that'd be a certain, for us, the state, to see that this did affect us and how it affected us. But I think by not going for any increase or having any contingency account,
Any contingency relative to this? There is a
Any
contingency.
contingency relative to this, other than the other contingencies we've discussed or that are in the budget,
Right.
is reckless.
Let me-
It's
I take
financially
exception. I take exception to that, and I can, and like I said, I think if it was at a significantly smaller, but a smaller amount perhaps, but I think where we're getting up into, you're talking about contingency ads here of over $1 million. I mean, you asked how I felt.
It's about,
The answer could have simply been a one-word line. I felt that it was appropriate to at least put that out there. I respect everybody else's opinions and where they're going. I don't think what anybody else here is doing is reckless or any of that in the other side of the argument. And I respect my colleagues' decision there, but I feel differently.
thank you, Mr. Becker. That was very eloquently said. I appreciate that. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just to have one clarification, minor correction. When we were talking a little bit earlier, we deducted 65,000 instead of the 165,000 when we did the calculation for the contribution surplus plus the amount available, because we've increased expenses by 165, offset by the
Right.
$100,000 revenue. So the amount of money that would be available to spend on non-contribution surplus would be $1,120,830.
$1,120,000.
830.
So you took off 165,000?
Yeah, because it's not the net, it's the gross.
So we went from 1.3 to 1.16.
About the expenditure budget, you have to.
Oh, that's correct. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
About what?
Increase the expenditure budget 165, and that's what you're funding with the contribution to surplus, not the net.
Got it.
Yes.
1,120,000. So let me ask another question. Suppose, because this is, what we're all trying to do, right? What we're all scared of is what's going to happen at the state level, right, over the next few months. And Mr. Walsh, as you said, a lot of them, It's about protecting the town. I will say, I'm not near, the 1.9, guys, I'm stretching it at 1.8. I'll just let you know, I am stretching it at 1.8. I'm trying to reach a compromise solution here and trying to, get all parties to come together, is what I'm trying to do. What the concern is what's going to happen in September. Should we have something from the state? Now we have three options. Cut expenditures, right, which, to Mr. Walsh's point, and Mr. Becker, I'm sure you would agree with this, at the 1.3, there's not a lot of place to go, right?
No disagreement.
No disagreement. So the 1.3, we're all in agreement. You go down to 1.3, there's no place to cut, right? Come, at that time frame, come September, okay?
It's drastic things.
It's drastic things, right? It's drastic things,
Sell a
right?
beach,
Right.
get rid of the
Sell
sell the
marina.
golf courses.
Right, right. Well, the golf courses actually make money, which is,
You're raising taxes.
and you're, well, maybe.
Or, yeah.
Use of surplus. That's been floated out there. What do people think about that? And I'm just throwing it out, because I want to make sure we have a fully vetted discussion here.
Wouldn't, God forbid we're there, but why do we have a surplus? We have a surplus to protect us from catastrophes and disasters, right? And I understand we want to keep building it up, but, and maybe I'm incorrect about this, but if that happens, to me, maybe that's the time you have to dip into the surplus. I don't know, it's a discussion.
And that's what I want.
And that's the interesting part, John, is that in having that committee we had, and listen, the reason to have a surplus is really not for that emergency. It's actually just to have the surplus. I know. Because if you touch the surplus, you get hit. Like West Hartford had a major windstorms during the winter. They lost thousands of trees. They had an expense come up for $3-4 million. They decided, we have a pretty healthy surplus. This is what it's for, this one-time event. They use it, they get negative downgrade because of it. So you're like, well, why is that? Well, because you don't have the number we're looking for anymore for a AAA community. That's why, like.
Makes no sense.
So basically, they're saying they don't want you to have a surplus to cover something. They just want you to have that money always in your account.
Yeah, they want us to tax the taxpayer, so we have this money in the account all the time.
Well,
And I'll go to you, Ms. Martin.
Couple of points. One, I understand what you're saying, and I think it depends on the town, the management, the relationship with the rating companies, if you have a plan together. Using the surplus, is sometimes appropriate. I think, though, that if you're, because kind of one could say where this conversation is half going, 1.3 or use the surplus. If 1.3 is the threshold above which you use surplus, that surplus is going to be gone
Fast.
really quickly. So you won't be talking about surplus in it.
That's the last
Because,
resort.
that's
Okay, Mrs. Marmion, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, and I mean, I know we have a policy on this and that we are concerned with maintaining our AAA rating. I just think it's a last resort. I would look at contingency first and leave the surplus there.
We actually
What about a
voted on
supplemental?
policy.
What
We
about a
voted on
s-
policy.
I saw the
What about a
policy. I
supplemental?
printed, what is it, 7% or what, yeah, so I looked at it. I don't know how old that is.
It's not that old, but what about supplemental income tax? Or income tax, supplemental tax bill? Because you just said that's the last place I'd go, right? So you'd go to supplemental tax before that. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, and I guess it's all somewhat abstract because
We're not there yet.
we're not there yet. And so I feel comfortable with the contingency, increasing the contingents, going to the 1.8, 1.9. I'm comfortable with that. And then leaving our surplus the way it is. And then if we need supplemental taxes, well, we're not there yet. So
Right.
I don't know what to say about that because I don't know what the hit is going to be. So I don't know where we're going to be, basically.
Got it.
I think it's premature.
Thank you, Mrs. Marmion. Mrs. Leclerc?
Oh, I always believed the surplus was for a major catastrophe, that the town was, for cash flow, that if the town was unable to collect tax revenue for a quarter or 6 months, the town wouldn't shut down, that we'd be able to continue on. And so that's why I don't believe it should ever really be touched. And I think our challenge here is that we have to find a balance between a very bad situation. This is a really difficult budget, and I could spend this money that we're talking about putting aside twice what we're talking about, and very easily to budget for what I felt like would be a good budget. But we can't do that, and we have to prepare for the future. And we could still get hit, and we have to be prepared that we may have a supplemental tax increase, or have to spend this towards something that's not funded at the state level. So that's my view.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt, we're on the topic of
Yeah.
utilization of surplus
Yeah.
and how we deal with this in the fall.
Surplus would be my last option, frankly, supplemental tax. Use of contingency and supplemental tax. I think that's the firing order. You could, it's funny because some people might say that supplemental tax bill is going to affect everyone, right? And that's kind of true. But I think using surplus is affecting everyone. It might not actually feel it right away, but when we start talking about losing AAA ratings and our long-term, then we're talking about longer-term effects as far as I'm concerned. So being a taxpayer and trying to assess the taxpayer's position, I think we've got to put something in contingency, and if that doesn't help us, then we're into supplemental tax.
And then,
Yeah.
I just on the surplus issue, it's an interesting discussion, but we did get a lot of emails from people saying, use the surplus. You have a ton of money in there. Why aren't you using that? And I think it's incumbent upon us to educate them why that's not necessarily a good idea. That's
Yeah.
all.
I think, if I may,
Uneducated people out there about that issue.
That issue, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I think part of that issue, just Chris DeWitt's opinion, because it was called the Rainy Day Fund, sounds like a jar you have on top of your refrigerator if you need to replace something. It's not a rainy day fund. And Mr. Walsh has multiple times in this forum and other forums expressed what the real deal is for surplus. And I always interpreted surplus the way Mrs. Leclerc did. This is for catastrophic kind of things, which makes the incident in, I think it was East Hartford, you said? West Hartford, makes it even more egregious that that happened to them, because that's a real, significant issue that you'd think surplus would be the perfect thing to use, and then you turn around and get hit, so.
I want to ask, thank you, and I want to hear from everybody on this, but I want to ask Mr. Walsh a specific question, because there was something that you had told me that I wasn't aware of, and you told me quite recently. You had a conversation as part of your work with the Fund Balance Committee with one of our advisors, and I don't want to go putting words in his mouth or quoting the gentleman, but hadn't he already said that he had been receiving phone calls from the rating agencies regarding?
No, he said he'd been on rating calls that Bob sometimes is involved in, and he said at that point, based on what the state was doing, that much of the call, and matter of fact, the first thing that they wanted to talk about the rating agencies, how are you going to cover if the governor's plan goes through? How's that going to work for you? They want the town to explain it, because they didn't seem as though they were interested in hearing that you were just going to run to fund balance and cut your fund balance in half.
What did they say they would do if you did that?
He didn't say that they were making, they wanted to know, because they are not happy with the governor's plan. I mean, I think a number of the agencies, the Standard & Poor's and whatever, already came out with opinions about what the governor's plan was. That basically you're passing it down to the community. And how are they supposed to make up this money? But they wanted to know. If you look at how, were those surveys, Bob, of just Fairfield County, the ones that you sent around to our whole board?
Those were 14 of the 16 AAA towns.
Okay, now that survey, which I don't have
the survey, but I'd say the survey that Bob did was how are other AAA communities going to handle this $9 million, or their version of the $9 million.
Right. Now, we get quoted a lot. There was a lot of quotes about Westport was going to use some of their surplus.
Theirs was a lot higher. Yeah.
go to that. Talk to us a little bit about that. What do you, I'm just trying to lay all the issues. I'm trying to
There
vet.
was, there's 13, not including us, 13 people who contributed. Only one said they were going to use surplus. One said they were putting it on the Board of Ed. It's a Board of Ed budget. One said they were including it in their budget, and the rest said they were ignoring it.
Right, who's going to use surplus?
Westport is using a little bit.
And they're at what
And
percentage?
they're basically, and I was actually surprised. I talked to Gary,
0.8.
because their
I thought they were
budget
50.
increase is like
That's
at
Weston.
1 point something. I mean, they're using surplus to get down to, but they got a big surplus.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Becker, you had a comment?
Yeah, that brought up an interesting one, though. Why is it if this happens, and we go or don't go, or however the
Right.
legal route, but we end up having to put this in, why is it coming on the town side and not on the Board of Ed side? And whose
Well, because
determination
right
is
now,
that?
it's a good question. Right now, that hasn't been determined. It was put on the town side this year. This was answered early on. It was put on the town side this year because of the uncertainty. Because if we put the 9.2 million in
and it
on the Board of Ed
bumps.
side, and then voted on one number, and the state did not charge us the 9.2, the Board of Ed has a windfall to use the 9.2.
So, agree with that.
Right.
If we get the bill,
Right.
and we say the town in some capacity has to pay it, what's the assumption that it has to end up being on ours? I mean, if you think about it, it's a Board of Ed item. It's really tied to their salary,
Fair
their
point.
health, I mean, this is a Board of Ed comp item. The Board of Ed, and another aside to it to some extent in there, I think their negotiations are coming up again, but that's not a factor of the negotiation. If this gets shifted, I mean, I would sure hope that it becomes a factor of the negotiation, because we took this out for new hires in, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, and made adjustments there, and have made adjustments over the years in the percentages allocated, everything, to mitigate the town's risk on this item. And we've got, obviously, it's a point of frustration, and we have no control, but to me, again, that's all BOE. It's their negotiation, it's their, component.
Yep.
And I think we need to be very careful, because I think the day that we pay $1 out on the town side is the day it also potentially permanently sits on the town side.
I think the first selectman, I asked him that question during the budget hearing, and he said that he was keeping on the town side because of the uncertainty.
Well, that's
Number
what we
one, it
said.
was just the governor.
Right.
But he also said that if this plan really does go into
Going
phase,
over there.
he's moving it to the Board of Education.
Well, what if the BOE, let's make it over this discussion. I mean, because it gets to the question you raised. If
That's
this were
exactly
to
what he
come
did
down-
say.
If it were to come down, and then on the BOE
But
side,
it's-
you can't touch the BOE side. What happens if in 6 months it comes down and we give it to the BOE? And now the BOE needs to deal with it.
Maybe.
And maybe they've got to now come to us, and that's your explanation why we have to transfer contingency and all that. But it raises some very interesting questions about it.
sure
And
does.
what happens when they go, no, not ours, and we're not paying the bill, and then the bill's due? I mean, there's a lot of.
Yep.
I know
I
we
mean,
all
we're
work
2 months
together,
after
but-
that,
but
and
this
we
is a
have this
big hit
one
to
guy here,
people's-
this guy, he has
Yeah.
2 different opinions in a week.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
we
it's-
still don't know how
it's-
this is dealing with it. It's just like
Right.
one day this guy wakes up and it's one way, next day he wakes up it's another way.
That's why we're having this discussion.
Which is why I say, don't send that guy any more money.
So what else? So what else do we want to talk about related to this?
Just kind of like, just an interesting throw in here, okay? If the speaker's 5-year roll-in,
Yeah.
9194 by 20% is 1838. With the 1.8%, we have 1120. The town would still be looking for $718,000.
Right, so we're still exposed.
Right.
Right.
Well,
With no place to go other than a sweeper?
Maybe we rent a sweeper out.
We'll rent it for 50
And-
grand.
Hey, there you go.
probably wouldn't affect this year, but that fifth year out, they're using an 8% return rate, a discount rate, so they're going to
Yeah.
have, that number's gonna
Let's
be-
not go too far afield. It's a valid point, but let's not go too far
on the
afield.
No,
trip-
the next year is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, let's talk about,
So on the debt, on the AAA and the ratings agencies and all that, use this opportunity to once again say that I think that the chair of this board should, even if it's listen-in mode only, should have an opportunity to hear that, or at a minimum, I prefer him and the chair of the fund balance committee, but at minimum, one of them. I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Becker, I appreciate that. I know we just lost one of our members. I'm going to give him a minute or two. Not much more. What else on this topic?
I think we beat it up.
Okay. Does, I think we know where we all stand. Mr. Brown, do you want to do the,
motion on the contingency?
yeah,
You need to add the 25,000 to it from before.
What's the number?
Yeah, what's the numbers?
Like, it changes, it's like the state, it changes every 5 years.
Well, I'm just reminding you, remember early on, we had a
What's the
25.
number?
What's the number?
So the number is 1438.
no, it's not.
No, I thought it was like 1.16.
There's no way it's that number.
Well, I think
The
Mr. Mayor's
last
taking...
comment was
this total
1.16
amount
million
for
was
1.8.
going to go into
Some's
contingency.
going to go to contingency, whatever.
And
But he's
certain- then
got
surplus.
$25,000 set. That's how he's getting to his one...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
you're
that's
looking-
wrong, because you already have the 65.
Yeah, it's already out.
You already have, what, 65?
The 65 that was added earlier. It's got to be deducted from that to hit that number. It's got to be a deduction.
So just so we're clear, we want to know what number goes in contingency and what goes in surplus balance, right?
Right.
Those are the only two numbers we really want to know, right? Or increase in surplus, I mean.
Minus the 65,
165.
which is 165, which is 1, 2.
1 million.
This is 4. This is 2.
I want to go on record as saying the only department head to stay the whole night, Mr. Michelangelo. Either he has nothing better to do, or...
What do we got, Mr. Mayor?
Oh, shoot, that's right, sorry.
You don't need 20.
And you're gonna spend your whole birthday here.
Yeah, you're right.
If we don't go out 3 digits, if we don't go out 3 digits, we're gonna be at 9.5. We're right on the cusp. If you wanna add, make it 128,000.
If you want to take advantage of rounding, you want to go to 2 digits, you don't have to add in the $25,000. And the number that you'd want to add is 1,248,000. 1,248,000.
248,000
Wait, can I clarify?
You can.
to contingency.
Okay. What you want to add to contingency is 1,120,000 even.
No, they're not adding it to countries of surplus, they're setting it everywhere.
No, this is contingency. They're increasing contingency. by
Okay.
1,120,000.
Yes.
And you would need to add to contribution to surplus 120.
Right, but they were doing it in one, they said they were doing it in one
Oh,
number.
I'm sorry, I didn't know you were doing it in one number.
It's a sec, well, that, no.
No, break it out like you said.
Two different objects, you have to vote to 2 different objects.
No, you don't.
Okay,
Just, we can vote one,
and we could.
Based on that.
yeah, just give them the numbers.
So then it's 128,000 to surplus? Is that what you said?
Yeah, let's make it
1,120,000 to contingency, 128,000 to surplus.
Is that the right, is that right?
Let me just make sure.
What numbers did you say?
I said 1,120,000 to contingency, 128,000 to surplus.
That adds up.
That gets you to the 1.248 million total.
Right. I thought earlier you said you wanted to just put it all in contingency and move the contribution to surplus later. That's why I'm saying.
Oh, it doesn't matter, yeah.
But,
And,
or doing it both, I mean,
That's fine.
and that's a total increase to the tax of 1.8 million, percent, sorry,
1.8%?
1.8%. That's what we were searching for, right?
1.81.
1.81%. That 0.01% is going to kill us.
Fund balance remains at 9.53.
Thoughts?
Increase to tax.
Make a motion?
You want one and you want one into fund balance? Is that what you're doing?
Well, that's what we're asking.
We can
Yeah, do it.
motion. One motion.
So it's just
One
one motion. One motion, I make a motion to add into contingency 1,120,000 and into surplus,
Contribution to surplus.
contribution to surplus, 128,000.
Do we have a second to that? Mr. Matola seconds that. Any further discussion on this item? Anything? Okay. All in favor?
I just want to know, if I vote no on this, it's because I think there should be more. So I just want to be
Say it
clear.
again.
If I vote no on this, it's because I think there should be more money into the
Right.
account. So
Okay.
it's not that I'm voting that I don't think that there should be this money. Mr. Becker doesn't think there should be any money. I'm telling you I think there should be more. So I just want to be clear with what my vote is.
Got it.
I'm actually voting no, but the surplus I agree with, and I just think that the contingency should be a lower number than where we're at.
Okay.
A couple hundred.
So you think that we should have surplus without adding on to?
I think to stick to the fund balance committee's recommendation, we should take the appropriate steps with the surplus line in our budget year to year.
So you're voting against the
final
surp-
calculation on the surplus should be done in accordance. So if it were only a couple $100,000 going into contingency, obviously the surplus would be a much smaller number.
Yeah,
I
but
do
you're voting
agree,
against
though,
the
that we
surplus.
do the surplus adjustment
Your
to the
vote,
fund balance committee's preference.
but you don't agree with the increase in the contingency account, correct?
Not at this level, no.
So without that, you don't have to worry about the surplus.
Yeah, deeper in debt,
All right.
literally.
All right, anybody else?
No, that's
Anybody else?
You haven't seen any.
Not
Seeing
correct.
none? All in favor of this motion? Opposed? Abstentions. Okay, we had 7 in favor, 2 against. One who wants to go high, one who wants to go low. Okay. The budget is now before us in total, and then we'll go to the WPCA budget very quickly. Will you guys get us the number? Can I just go to WPCA, or do you have them?
You have to, that OPEB number, you have to adjust it down by, hold on,
The OPEB number.
the OPEB for town retirees.
Oh,
You need to vote a decrease of $725.
We already did that.
No, you did the general fund.
Oh, in WPCA.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
If you do that, I won't.
So the WPCA budget is before us, and I'm going to vote to decrease the OPEB number by 720, I'm going to ask that we amend the OPEB number by $725. We have a second. Any comments, questions? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so WPCA budget is before us as amended. Any questions, comments?
Do we ever do debt service?
Debt service, we don't have to vote on, we just do it as part of the overall budget. We did look at it, we did ask for any comments. Any other questions, comments on WPCA? I'm going to ask for a vote on this. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? WPCA is done. Do we have a final budget number that we can vote on? This is voting on everything for the town.
Can we get a total contingency number too?
Yeah, it's 1,120,000 is that part of the contingency.
Yeah, or the whole, I guess the
You
number,
could add it
the
to
other
the-
number that's in here hadn't changed, right?
Right.
Correct, okay.
Total budget
Yeah,
is 299, 459, 597, which is a 2.03% budget increase. Budget increase, I don't want to give you a hard.
tax increase or mill rate increase
I'm working on right now.
should be 1.8.
1.8, 2.03.
1.81.
Okay. So the budget before us, as adjusted this evening, God bless you, is $2,299,459,597.
Correct.
That budget is now before us. Any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, all in favor of that budget? Opposed? Abstentions? 1 opposed, 8-4. We're done. I want to thank everybody for a good discussion. This was not an easy discussion. This is not an easy vote. It's most certainly not an easy vote. I thank everybody for your time and for your goodwill and for your good debates. Anybody have anything else to add? Seeing none, all in favor of adjournment? Opposed, abstentions. Good night, everybody.